In a darkened room, tension rises. A ruthless killer, known only as Mr. Bobby, is given bad news. His money is missing. Without hesitation, he silences the messenger with a single move, then turns to the rest. His message is clear: find the money or suffer the same fate. Meanwhile, a man, barely clinging to life, is faced with an impossible choice. A system appears before him, offering a second chance. He can go back, but at a cost. His abilities will reset, and he must start over. When asked to choose a date, he utters, February 28th, 1985, the day I was born. What happens next defies all logic. He awakens, but not as himself. He is in his mother's womb, moments before birth. The agony is unbearable, a pressure unlike anything he's ever felt. His mother screams, struggling to bring him into the world. Realizing that hesitation could put her life at risk, he pushes forward, forcing himself to be born. Then, the system rewards him. Achievement unlocked, overcoming adversity. His new trait, the man who overcame adversity, grants him extraordinary resilience. His skills and stats increase when he's at his weakest, and pain is completely negated. A terrifying ability, once wielded by the most formidable being in history, the first evil. But why was the first evil so powerful? The answer lies in history. In this world, 16 awakeners once rose to the top. 8 called the virtues, who followed the system, and 8 called the evils, who defied it. They weren't truly good or evil, just self-serving. The virtues held power, monopolizing dungeons and resources, and the evils fought to overthrow them. But among them, one stood above all, the first evil, a man who grasped the system's secrets before anyone else. His strength was unparalleled, and now, another awakener like him has been born. Determined to change his fate, the newborn desperately attempts to communicate. Though his body is weak, his mind is sharp. He focuses and forces out his first words, status window. It works. The system responds, confirming what he already suspected. He is the world's first awakener. As a reward, he receives a challenger box, an item he never thought he'd see again. This box once granted him the power to turn back time, and now he has the chance to open it once more. Inside, he discovers a legendary skill, Odin's Wrath. He knows it well. It belonged to the 6th virtue, a warrior so powerful that a mere flick of his hand once wiped out half of his guild. With this ability, he might finally have a chance to fight back, but only if he prepares for the day of beginnings. Tears well up in his infant eyes, and despite his mind's resolve, his newborn body betrays him. He cries. His parents wake up, his mother soothing him with soft words. My only wish, she whispers, holding him close, is for you to grow up healthy, free of sickness. As they drift back to sleep, he makes a silent vow. The real reason he came back wasn't just for power, it was to protect the people he once lost. And this time, he won't lose a single one. In his past life, he had no warning. One moment, he was walking down the street, casually talking on the phone, and the next, chaos. The sky tore open and monstrous beasts rained down, hungry for human flesh. Panic set in. He tried to run, but before he could escape, the system intervened, transporting him, along with countless others, to a mysterious testing site. This was the day of beginnings, the moment when reality itself was shattered. Rifts between dimensions opened, unleashing an endless tide of creatures upon the world. Those chosen were thrown into brutal trials. Some fought for mere months, while others endured decades. But returning to the real world didn't mean safety. The survivors, now called Awakeners, found themselves in a battlefield once more. The monsters hadn't disappeared, they had spread. In desperation, humanity's leaders resorted to their strongest weapon, a nuclear strike. It failed. The nation collapsed, and amidst the ruins, the most powerful beings in existence, the 8 virtues and 8 evils, carved out their own empires, free of consequences or restraint. Now, reborn into the past, he sits quietly, watching television. The world is locked in the Cold War, but he knows these conflicts are meaningless compared to what's coming. His parents play with him, their smiles warm and full of life. He cherishes this moment, knowing how fragile it truly is, because soon an unthinkable tragedy will strike. He cannot afford to be unprepared. Late at night, he wakes and forces himself to move. Step by step, he stumbles forward only to fall, but he refuses to stay down. Pushing himself up, he takes 10 full steps. The system immediately rewards him, granting him increased vitality and precious stat points. Even more shocking, it acknowledges his determination by bestowing him with a bronze box, a reward that, in his past life, took unimaginable suffering just to obtain. This only reaffirms his purpose. He must find the first evil and eliminate him before he can grow into an unstoppable force. He will not allow that monster to exist in this timeline. Sitting outside, another quest appears. Hold a conversation of 10 or more sentences. A simple task, or so it seems. His parents would be terrified if he spoke too soon, so he must choose carefully. Scanning the calendar, he notices Thanksgiving is approaching, and on that day, he meets Gia, a bright 4-year-old girl with intelligence beyond her years. In his past life, she was a prodigy, passing the bar exam at a shockingly young age, growing into a woman of both beauty and brilliance. But none of that mattered in the end, because on that day, she vanished without a trace. Maybe if he had been stronger, if he had trained as much as she had studied, he could have saved her. She hugs him, unaware of the weight of his thoughts. And in that moment, he starts speaking. Sentence after sentence, a natural conversation flows between them. Her parents smile, amused by how quickly the two have bonded. Before she leaves, he makes her promise. Tell no one about this. She nods, sealing their secret. With that, another quest is complete. And to his astonishment, it wasn't just any quest. It was the final one of the tutorial. The system presents him with a choice. Skip infancy and childhood? A part of him longs to stay, to spend more time with his parents while they are still alive. But deep down, he knows the truth. If he stays too long, his abilities will develop in ways that might terrify them. He makes his decision. He skips ahead, steeling himself for what's to come. The days of innocence are over. Now, it's time to prepare for the battles that lie ahead. The year is 1997. In a dimly lit underground pit, a hulking opponent charges forward, but in mere moments, he's sent crashing to the ground. Another victory. The crowd erupts, but Sunu barely acknowledges them. He isn't here for recognition. From the sidelines, the organizer watches in disbelief. This guy never loses. He even whispers that Sunu was the one who destroyed Mapo District. Nice work, the man says, but Sunu cuts him off. More. The organizer hesitates. Listen, kid, it's late, and honestly, you're too skilled for this. Your level is beyond pit fights. You're fighting like a world-class pro. Sunu's eyes darken. I won't repeat myself. Either you bring me stronger opponents, or I'll find someone who will. With that, he pulls up his status window. His stats have grown significantly. 87 unallocated points waiting to be used. His body is already built like an adult, his strength and perception rivaling elite athletes. He removes his cap, looking at his reflection. Wounds that should take weeks to heal are already fading, one of the many advantages of being an awakener. He had once been of average height, but now he towers at 180 centimeters. The stats he increased during the tutorial had permanently shaped his body. Still, this is not enough. He remembers the testing site, a brutal proving ground where survival was all that mattered. If he were thrown back there now, even with this power, he wouldn't last. He needs to level up. He's already scouted a place, an F-rank dungeon hidden in a small mountain near Hong City. But raiding a dungeon isn't as simple as walking in. He needs a strategy. First, he has to buy the mountain, blockade it, set up defenses in case monsters escape. The problem? The land alone costs 1.3 million, and factoring in the necessary reinforcements, He needs far more money than he currently has. And that's just the beginning. There are dungeons scattered across the world, hidden from public knowledge. If he wants true power, he has to monopolize them. He scratches his head. He knows the future. Making money is easy. He could earn a fortune in an instant. But there's a problem. He's still a minor. Legally, he can't do anything. What he needs is a proxy. His thoughts are interrupted when a teacher suddenly places her hand in front of his face. "Focus on your studies," she scolds. Middle school lessons? Right now? Impossible. His mind drifts back to the past. 2 of his guild members had betrayed him once. He remembers the desperation on their faces, their frantic apologies, and he remembers the moment he grabbed the spears they had impaled him with, just before he erased them from existence, along with the very ground beneath their feet, all for a damn box. A voice emerges from the shadows. That power just now. That was the insignia of destruction. Sunu turns, his gaze locking onto the man who spoke, Jonathan. His first instinct is suspicion. Another betrayer? But then, Jonathan heals him. A warm energy floods his body as the man says, "With this, my debt to you is repaid." For the first time in a long while, Sunu is left stunned. Is there still compassion in this world? As they exit the cave, Jonathan casually begins talking about Wall Street and the financial market. Sunu listens, intrigued. His country had been in crisis when he was younger. He remembers the '97 financial collapse vividly. Jonathan wasn't just anyone. He had been a trader, a powerhouse in Hong Kong during the Asian currency crisis. He had lived his glory days playing the market like a game of chess. Sitting down, Jonathan smirks. "They used to call me the Wolf of Wall Street," he says, a glimmer of nostalgia in his eyes, back when money was everything. Jonathan had been a force. His A-rank stats made him the envy of many. But he was a man stuck in the past, longing for the days when fortunes were made with a single calculated risk. Sunu, however, sees an opportunity. At this very moment, Jonathan should be working on Wall Street, affiliated with a finance company that had Wolf in its name. Sunu wastes no time. He digs through records, searching for his old acquaintance. And when he finally finds him, there's no mistaking it. Jonathan's face carries no trace of despair, but Sunu recognizes him instantly. Without hesitation, he writes an email. A simple question: is the Thai baht currently overvalued? At this time in history, Jonathan had been speculating that hedge funds were planning an attack on Thailand's currency. But he was never fully certain. If Sunu plays this right, he can reshape everything. Jonathan responds quickly. No, the Thai baht is not overvalued. Sunu smirks. Liar. Jonathan knows the truth. He's just pretending he doesn't. Sunu fires back another email. A carefully worded message, just vague enough to intrigue him. What I meant by overvalued is, couldn't someone just leverage that? And just like that, Jonathan takes the bait. Almost immediately, a response arrives. But this time, it's not a simple answer. Who are you? Who are you affiliated with? Sunu leans back. Perfect. This is what he needed. Now, the real game begins. He writes another email, strategically laying out his thoughts. He warns that Asia is a prime target for hedge funds, predicting that an attack on the Thai baht will happen within a month. But Thailand? That's just the beginning. Jonathan reads the message, eyes widening. Could it be true? Right now, Wall Street is in a volatile state, and whoever this mysterious sender is, they understand exactly how this world works. Jonathan sees this as a test. He replies, leaving an open invitation. My office is always open. Here's my contact information. Sunu expected this. Jonathan is a shark. Once he scents blood, he won't let go. And now, a financial war is about to be declared. In April 1997, the hedge fund assault on the Thai baht will begin. And this time, Sunu will be ready. In 1992, it took just 50 days for a single hedge fund to bring down the British pound. The collapse sent shockwaves through Wall Street, reinforcing a dangerous belief that any currency could be crushed within the same time frame. So when the financial elite set their sights on Thailand, they assumed history would repeat itself. The Thai baht would fall in less than 2 months, but Sunu knew better. While training, he recalls how the Thai baht didn't fall so easily. Unlike the pound, it resisted. For over 3 months, the Thai government and its banks fought back, even landing severe blows on the hedge funds. But in the end, their defenses crumbled, and on July 2nd, the currency collapsed. By then, Jonathan had sent him over 10 frantic emails, each one concerning investment goods obtained by betting against the baht. Sunu finally replies, "If you have an investment that bets on the baht increasing instead, then we'll talk." Jonathan freezes. Bet on the baht increasing? The financial products he had sent were exclusive, offered only by high-level VIPs. For Sunu to even suggest that the baht could rise meant one of two things. Either he was a fool, or he knew something the rest of Wall Street didn't. And on top of that, he wanted 51% control of the investment deal. Jonathan leans back, running a hand through his hair. This guy must be a scammer. He tidies his desk, ready to dismiss the entire conversation, then instinctively reaches for the phone to call other VIPs. But something stops him. He hesitates. Then, instead of making the call, he sends another message. "How did you come to the conclusion that the hedge funds would lose?" Sunu's reply comes within seconds. "I never said the hedge funds would lose, but the Thai banks have countless strategies at their disposal. My conclusion? The baht will rise, at least in the short term." Jonathan nearly chokes on his drink. Wall Street is betting billions on the baht collapsing in May. The biggest firms are certain of it, using the situation to strengthen their ties with VIP investors. But if the baht doesn't fall, there will be hell to pay. Jonathan starts second-guessing everything. Does he warn them? Does he pretend he knows nothing? He attempts to voice his concerns, but his boss immediately shuts him down. "Ridiculous," the man scoffs. "Do you realize how stupid you sound?" Jonathan clenches his fists, swallowing his frustration. He looks at his research, the unanswered emails, the clues Sunu had given him. Finally, he types out a response. "Wolf Corporation has no intention of developing this kind of investment in the first place." Sunu doesn't hesitate. "That's why I'm suggesting you go independent." Jonathan leans back, exhaling sharply. Independent? Giving Sunu 51% control would be like handing him the keys to his entire future. No one in their right mind would agree to such a contract. "You expect me to just hand over control of my fortune?" he writes back. "Think carefully," Sunu responds. "This proposal is valid until the end of May." And then, silence. Jonathan waits. Days pass, weeks, no new emails. It drives him mad. Between his boss belittling him, his peers laughing at the absurd idea of the baht increasing, and his own growing doubts, he feels trapped. But then, the unthinkable happens. The Asian Central Bank intervenes. A $12 billion aid package is sent to Thailand, and just like that, Wall Street is in shambles. Jonathan stares at the news in disbelief. That guy was right. The Thai baht rises. He lets out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. A tear slips down his face. He had the answer right in front of him all along, and no one listened. His thoughts are interrupted when his boss calls for him. The moment he steps into the office, he knows something is wrong. The VIP investors are already there, furious. They had all bet on the collapse, and now they were losing millions. His boss isn't introducing him to help him, he's throwing him under the bus. Jonathan doesn't wait for it to happen. He calmly hands over his business card. "Starting today, I'm leaving Wolf Corporation. I'll be establishing my own investment firm." The room goes silent. His boss stares at him, stunned. Jonathan smirks. "I know you wanted me gone, so I'm just saving you the trouble." He turns to the furious VIPs. "And if any of you are looking for someone who actually predicted this disaster, you know how to reach me." That night, as Sunu finishes his training, A single email arrives. He reads it, then smiles. Jonathan had finally made his move. Sunu types out a short response. Come to Seoul, right now. At school, Sunu feels nothing. Most of his classmates avoid him. His towering physique and sharp demeanor make him unapproachable. But that's exactly how he wants it. He has no interest in building connections. As the hallway empties, a wave of memories crashes over him. A city in ruins. People slaughtered in the streets. The echoes of their screams still linger in his mind. From a distance, his teacher watches him. And suddenly, without understanding why, she starts to cry. Later, at the airport, Sunu meets Jonathan. As they walk to find a place to sit, he notes how strange it is to see Jonathan looking so clean-cut. In his previous life, this man had always been more rugged, unpolished. They sit down. Jonathan wastes no time. You sure took your time, he says, irritation in his voice. After all that, I figured we'd meet sooner. But he knew, from the way Sunu wrote his emails, that this wasn't an ordinary teenager. There was something unsettling about his precision, his confidence. Sunu meets his gaze unfazed. I wrote the emails. Then, casually, he adds, and thanks for coming. Jonathan studies him carefully. How old are you? 19? 20? He lets out a bitter laugh. I came here risking everything. Do you even understand what you've just done? Sunu holds his stare, then asks, do you judge people by their age on Wall Street? Jonathan's fingers tighten around his cup. Sunu leans forward. I won't stop you if you want to leave. But since you came all this way, let me give you a parting gift. He slides a report across the table. Jonathan picks it up, skimming the first few lines, then freezes. His eyes widen. Sunu gestures to the seat across from him. Sit down. Jonathan slowly lowers himself, gripping the document. The Asian economic crisis was inevitable, Sunu says, tapping the table. It was written in stone the moment the US started lending dollars without limit, all while claiming the 21st century would belong to Asia. They raised the 4 dragons only to let them burn. Jonathan stays silent, reading. Sunu continues. Hedge funds didn't cause this. They just saw an opportunity and took their piece of the pie. After a long pause, Sunu finally asks, so? What do you think of the report? Jonathan exhales. You think Thailand is going to collapse. Sunu smirks. What did you think before reading that? Jonathan doesn't answer immediately, because he knows the truth. No one on Wall Street truly knows how this will end. The Thai government had fought back hard. What was supposed to be a one-sided war had turned into a full-blown battlefield. The uncertainty had stretched all the way to July 2nd, the day Thailand finally surrendered. Jonathan shakes his head. The attackers always win in the end. But, he says, narrowing his eyes at the report, there's something missing. Sunu leans back. I'll answer that for you, but only if you decide to work for me. Jonathan studies him. So that's it. He won't give me the missing piece unless I join him. Jonathan had dismissed him at first because of his age, but now, he realizes that was a mistake. Jonathan crosses his arms. With my money and my record, I already have everything. What exactly do you have? Sunu raises an eyebrow. An opportunity. I could have chosen someone else. I still can. His voice is calm, steady. Even as we sit here, money is being lost, and you know it. Jonathan exhales sharply, thinking, if Sunu was right, if the Asian markets really were about to collapse, then a bet against Wall Street could bring in a fortune beyond imagination. But this was all happening too fast. Jonathan rubs his temples. I need time to think. Sunu sighs. Fine, you have until June 3rd. Jonathan blinks. Why June 3rd? He flips through the report again. His eyes suddenly catch something, a pattern, a gradual increase in numbers. He narrows his gaze. Wait, is this June 2nd? Sunu smiles slightly. Now all we need to do is calculate how much will be lost in the remaining days. Jonathan leans back, stunned. No one can predict a crash this precisely unless they're a god. His instincts scream at him. This is too accurate to be coincidence. Sunu stands up, turning his back to him. I'll wait until June 3rd. He pauses, then adds, if you can't decide by then, consider our relationship over. Then, without another word, he walks away. Jonathan sits there, gripping the report, deep in thought. Is this guy insane? Or worse, is he right? A few days later, Jonathan finally cracks. His answer comes in a single email. What's the company name? Sunu reads it, and for the first time in a long while, he smiles. As they sit together, Sunu looks Jonathan in the eye and asks, do you regret this? Jonathan exhales, shaking his head. Of course I do. He laughs bitterly. But it's too late now. Your report is too valuable to ignore. He leans forward, eyes narrowing. I can understand predicting a downturn, but how did you get the exact date? Sunu simply replies, calculations. Jonathan wants to question him further, but he doesn't. What's the point? This kid had been right every step of the way. He wouldn't doubt him anymore. Sunu leans back. I'll give you the ingredients for success. Jonathan smirks. And what about the recipe? Sunu's lips curl into a knowing smile. Jonathan feels his face flush slightly and sighs. Fine, I'll trust you. He shakes his head, still baffled by all of this. At the very least, I should know my business partner's name. Sunu gives it to him. Jonathan nods, thinking for a moment. Then let's call it Jonathan and Son Investment. Sunu immediately rejects the idea. Leave me out of the name. Jonathan chuckles. Fine, fine. He leans forward, lowering his voice slightly. I've got $400,000, every cent I have. Sunu raises an eyebrow. This guy's insane. Giving 51% of everything he owns to a stranger? Either Jonathan is a fool, or he has an unshakable gut instinct. Jonathan tilts his head. What about you? Got any money to add in? Sunu shakes his head. That's why I called you to Korea in the first place. Jonathan studies him. Why me? Sunu shrugs. I found you on the company website. Jonathan laughs, almost in disbelief. That's it? Disappointed? Jonathan leans back, smiling faintly. Not at all. Opportunities never come when you ask for them. They come in the strangest ways. Sunu pauses. Those exact words. He had heard Jonathan say them before, in another life. Originally, Sunu had planned to save up his points until he could open a challenger box. But at the last moment, he used them to open a master box instead. His reasoning? Simple. Sell the item, cash out, live in luxury, indulge in every carnal desire until there was nothing left. But fate had other plans. Inside that box wasn't just any item. It was a skill, something that should have only existed in a challenger box. The probability of that happening? Almost zero. And yet, that miracle had been granted to a man who had already given up on everything. After that, Jonathan had walked straight into death. No matter how much Sunu had tried to warn him, he had set off on a path of revenge. And not long after, Jonathan was dead. Sunu blinks, pulling himself back to the present. Jonathan frowns. Why are you looking at me like that? Then, smirking, he adds, Is it because you called me an opportunity? He leans in. Well, since I am one, why don't you give me a god-tier calculation? Sunu's expression turns serious. If you follow me, it's no questions asked. Are you in? Jonathan doesn't hesitate. Yeah. He slides a stack of documents across the table. Then sign these. Also, he adds, you did bring your ID, right? Sunu pulls out a single sheet of paper. This is the only way I can identify myself now. Jonathan reads it and freezes. 13-digit ID number. It's the equivalent of an American Social Security number. His eyes widen in shock. You're 13? Sunu sighs. There's no time to be surprised. Let's talk business. The second week of June. From the 9th to the 13th, the market will drop by 10%. Jonathan listens intently. You think Thailand will collapse then? Sunu shakes his head. Not yet, but it'll start. He taps the table. Remember what I told you, Thailand is just the beginning. Jonathan's face darkens. When the Thai market drops by 10%, fear will spread across all of Asia. Sunu nods. And the hedge funds attacking the bot? They'll start gaining allies. Jonathan exhales sharply. His mind races. The final target, it's Hong Kong. Right? Sunu smirks. Wrong. Jonathan's chest tightens. Then, what? Sunu's voice is calm. Korea. Jonathan shakes his head. That's impossible. Foreign hedge funds can't enter Korea without authorization. You're right. Sunu's gaze sharpens. But Korea won't be attacked by hedge funds. Then what? Sunu leans forward. Fear. Jonathan's breath catches. The fear that will make foreign investors pull out of Korea themselves. His stomach twists. He can already see it. The domino effect, the panic, the collapse. He exhales. Something big is coming. So what's your plan to stop it? Sunu shakes his head. I can't stop it. Jonathan clenches his fists. Then what the hell are we doing? Sunu's gaze doesn't waver. I told you, my goal isn't saving anyone. Then what is your goal? Sunu's lips curl into a smirk. Money. Jonathan stares. Sunu continues. This war will be waged by an alliance of hedge funds, but when it's over, they'll realize something. Jonathan swallows. What? Sunu's eyes gleam. That the real winner was never them. Jonathan grips the table. Then what's the play? We'll bet with 50x leverage. Jonathan's world shatters. His voice trembles. That's insane. If they're wrong, even slightly, they lose everything. Sunu remains unfazed. You understand why, don't you? Jonathan swallows hard. Even if the market drops 10%, it doesn't fall straight down. It goes up and down, and then fear sets in. That's when the real crash happens. Sunu nods. And with 50x leverage, Jonathan closes his eyes, exhaling shakily. If we lose just 1%, we're already down 50%. At 2%, we're wiped out. His hands are shaking. This isn't just a high-risk venture. This is insanity. But if Sunu's data is right, if they execute this perfectly, then they won't just make money, they'll make history. Sunu stands. Everything is in your hands now. Jonathan sits alone in his office, exhausted, starving, but his determination is unshakable. He's going through with this. Days later, Jonathan arrives back in Korea. Sunu sees him walking through the doors, looking as sharp as ever. But this time, he's brought back something even greater. Sunu smirks. You exchanged the money into dollars? Jonathan nods, his hands trembling. But then he lets out a breathless, disbelieving laugh. It's not just 700%. His shoulders shake. Tears well up in his eyes. We made 700 times the original $400,000. Sunu's eyes narrow. How much? Jonathan chokes on a laugh. In the past week, his voice cracks. We made $280 million. Sunu grins. They are filthy rich. From his hotel room, Sunu dials his mother. I'll be staying at a friend's place tonight, he says casually. With that, he hangs up and turns his attention to something far more pressing, Jonathan's miracle. How exactly did he pull this off? Sunu scans the reports, and what he finds is nothing short of astonishing. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Jonathan is celebrating like a madman. We did it! He shouts, practically glowing. I can't believe this! He paces back and forth, exhilarated. In one move, we went from nothing to one of the biggest hedge funds in the game. And it's just the two of us. Sunu, ever the strategist, remains unfazed. If you're not going to sleep, he says, let's talk about our next move. Jonathan smirks. You're really gonna hit me with more god-tier intel already? Sunu leans forward. Thailand might implement a floating exchange rate. Jonathan's celebration slows. Go on. If that happens, Sunu continues, it'll be our D-Day. We go all in, no hesitation. Every last dollar, Jonathan exhales, pacing again. There won't be a rally, Sunu explains. No buying the dip, it'll be pure, one-directional destruction. Jonathan rubs his temples. Well, obviously, switching to a floating exchange rate means Thailand surrendering. He exhales. But how much do you think our $200 million will turn into? Sunu's answer is instant. You mean after we leverage it? Jonathan freezes. Wait, you actually want to go all in? Sunu tilts his head. Why not? Jonathan throws his hands up. Because if we put $200 million against the bot, all hell will break loose. The hedge funds won't just sit there and watch. They'll fight back. Sunu remains calm. Then we'll leave them crumbs. Like I said before, we're the real ones waging war. Jonathan grips his hair. If your D-Day scenario is even slightly off, we lose everything. His voice rises. You're talking about gambling everything we just made. No hedge, no safety net. Just blind faith in the crash. He shakes his head. I can't do that, not unless you're a god or something. Sunu smirks. He pats Jonathan on the shoulder. Relax, there's data we need to put together first. Jonathan sighs, rubbing his temples. What data? Starting tomorrow, Sunu says. We track everything. Foreign exchange reserves, capital outflows, debt structuring. We compare it to July 2nd's historical crash. Jonathan scoffs. You realize data on this scale isn't easy to get, right? Sunu shrugs. We don't need it all, just enough to confirm what we already know. Jonathan crosses his arms. And what if the data contradicts your theory? Sunu leans back. Then we adjust, lower the leverage, push the attack one day earlier, July 1st. Jonathan studies him carefully. You've already planned for everything, haven't you? Sunu doesn't answer. Instead, he drops a casual bombshell. $80,000 should be enough to buy us a meeting with the head of the Thai central bank. Jonathan nearly drops his drink. You want me to meet with the Central Bank of Thailand? Sunu nods. Jonathan blinks. Are you actually 13? Sunu smirks. You should take a trip to Bangkok. Jonathan lets out a sharp breath. Jesus, if I mess this up, I might get gunned down. Sunu shrugs. Thailand knows they're about to fall. They're already preparing for the aftermath. His voice is calm. 1997 is going to be our payday. Jonathan swallows hard. So you're saying we go all in? Sunu's smirk doesn't fade. What else? The next morning, Jonathan boards a plane. He's nervous, but his eyes burn with the determination of an awakener entering a dungeon. While Jonathan infiltrates enemy territory, Sunu prepares in his own way. He enters a street fight. His opponent is tough, but not tough enough. Crack! The man screams as Sunu snaps his arm. Gasps ripple through the crowd. From the sidelines, the fight organizer shakes his head. Told you, he mutters. That kid's dangerous? The injured man, teeth clenched in agony, growls. You're gonna pay for this. Sunu grins. Good. That night, he walks straight into enemy territory. A gang, dozens of them, and they're all staring at him like he's insane. This guy actually showed up, one mutters. Another swallows. Does he know how outnumbered he is? Sunu simply cracks his knuckles. One-on-one fights won't raise my stats anymore. It's time to test something. The gang rushes him all at once. Sunu moves like a ghost. 3 go down in an instant. Not a single hit lands on him. But then, a flash of movement. Someone blindsides him. A solid blow slams into his back. Pain flares through his body. He barely reacts in time to shove the attacker away. But another comes from behind and lands a clean hit. The man smirks, tossing his weapon aside. That's it. He's finished. Except, Sunu's not finished. Before the attacker can even react, Sunu grabs him by the throat and slams him into the ground. A grin spreads across Sunu's face. This is what I needed. I can see the openings now. The system practically screams at him to use his abilities. But he doesn't. Not Odin's wrath. Not after what he saw it do. A motorcycle engine roars in the distance. A man, cigarette between his lips, watches them. This is like a damn movie, he mutters. Then he revs the engine and charges straight for Sunu. Too fast, no time to dodge. The bike slams into him. Sunu is sent flying, hitting the pavement hard. Pain explodes through his body. The gang wastes no time. They swarm him, boots slam into his ribs. Fists connect with his face. He can barely breathe. The man with the broken arm steps forward. I want the final hit. Sunu struggles to his feet. The man smirks, pulling back his leg for a devastating kick. And then, it activates. The man who overcomes adversity. A surge of power rushes through Sunu's body. All of his stats shift to E rank. The fight's not over, it's just beginning. The gang member grips his knife tightly, waving it around in sheer panic. His hands tremble. His breath is ragged. He saw what just happened, and he knows. This is not a normal fight. Sunu doesn't give him a chance to act. Bam! With a single, well-placed strike, the man collapses. Sunu exhales, his body buzzing with power. This trait, it's overwhelming. His stats are rising rapidly, but it's difficult to control. He clenches his fists, adjusting to the surging strength. From the corner of his eye, he sees the biker, the one who led the ambush. The man narrows his eyes, scanning the unconscious bodies scattered around. Then, with an intimidating presence, he signals the rest to attack. They charge. Sunu turns, planting his feet. His fist flies forward. Crash! One of them is sent flying several meters, crashing hard into the pavement. Another man freezes, eyes wide in disbelief. Sunu simply extends his hand. Without a word, the man hands over his weapon. Sunu accepts it, then promptly smacks him in the head with it, knocking him out cold. Finally, his gaze locks onto the biker, the last one standing. Sunu activates Odin's wrath. Boom! The man erupts in a storm of lightning. His body convulses, engulfed in electricity, before he collapses in a smoldering heap. Silence. The remaining gang members stare at Sunu in horror. What? Is he? Their hands shake. Their feet refuse to move. Is he even human? In the hotel room, Sunu leans against the wall, deep in thought. His ability. It doesn't activate from self-inflicted damage. It only triggers when he's on the verge of defeat, when he's truly pushed beyond his limits. He needs to master it, because this isn't just some combat advantage. This is his key weapon against monsters, against the 8 virtues and evils, against the war that's coming. His phone rings, a call from overseas. He answers. Jonathan's voice is urgent. You were right. Sunu's eyes sharpen. Jonathan continues. They were waiting for us. Like you said, the amount of money they took was just over 20%. So it's close. But Sunu isn't thinking about Thailand's current condition. He's thinking about something else entirely. Close? Sunu mutters. Thailand still holds more foreign currency reserves than expected, which means he can't be certain yet, can't be sure if the hedge funds will actually win this war. He takes a breath. Jonathan, he says, voice steady. Any objections to going all in? Jonathan chuckles dryly. I already spent $80 million just to get a look at these documents. At this point, I'd have to be insane to back out. He exhales. But regardless of the outcome, what we're doing is straight up lunacy. Sunu closes his eyes. D-Day is July 2nd. Jonathan pauses, then sighs. I knew you were going to say that. His voice drops to a whisper. If your calculations are right, you already know how hedge funds like Dragon will react. Sunu nods. Yeah. Once Dragon, a representative hedge fund, moves, the rest will follow. It's the same principle as the 8 virtues and evils. Once the virtues take action, their supporting factions will rush in, turning everything into chaos. Jonathan rubs his temples. So, if you're right, we'll take control of every major investment fund in the world in one single move. Sunu leans forward. Then stop worrying. His voice is calm. Prepare for the attack instead. On July 1st, 1997, Hong Kong officially returns to China. But beneath the political spectacle, something far more sinister is brewing. A financial war is about to begin. It's modern history repeating itself, a second opium war. But instead of opium, the West floods Asia with billions of dollars, crippling their economies. Instead of cannons, they launch currency attacks, destabilizing entire nations. But Sunu knows the truth. Before his regression, Asia's financial collapse led to something far worse. The release of an S-rank dungeon, a sealed catastrophe. And behind it, one of the 8 virtues and his followers. Sunu clicks his mouse impatiently. He hates waiting. If only pagers existed yet. His funds are set. Their total purchasing power, $10 billion, even if they bet everything on Thailand's collapse. They still need someone to accept the trade for it to go through. Will there be enough liquidity? His inbox blinks. A new message. Jonathan, attack preparations are complete. Sunu exhales. His hand tightens around the mouse. He's done this before, thrown himself into dungeons, knowing survival wasn't guaranteed. But this time, his life isn't on the line, only money, and the jackpot is right in front of him. This time, there's no bad luck, no system nerfing his efforts. This time, he's the one holding the knife. He takes a breath, steadying himself. Don't get comfortable, it's been less than a year since his return. But his old world feels so far away. He types his final message to Jonathan. My preparations are complete. Then he leans back. Tomorrow, they will clear the biggest dungeon yet. Sunu sat at his desk, pretending to focus on his quiz, but his mind was elsewhere. His eyes flickered to the clock on the wall, 12 p.m. sharp. His heart pounded as he did the mental calculations. There's a 2-hour time difference between here and Thailand. That means, in just 30 minutes, the Bank of Thailand would make an earth-shattering announcement. It would switch to a floating exchange rate system. That's when everything truly begins. His memories of his past life were still vivid. He knew what was coming. Investors and speculators would divide into 3 factions. One group betting on Thailand's inevitable surrender, another wagering that it would hold on until mid-July, and a third foolishly believing that the country would triumph. But Sunu knew the truth. There won't be any third group this time. By inserting himself into the game, the entire financial battlefield would shift. The money others placed on Thailand, surrendering at a later date, would now funnel straight into his hands. The stage was set. The game was already his to win. A sharp voice cut through his thoughts. Sunu, why are you staring at the clock? His teacher's amused tone brought him back to the present. Sunu blinked, plastering on an apologetic smile. Ah, sorry miss, just spacing out. I'll focus now. The teacher chuckled, shaking her head. You talk like an old man sometimes. Sunu scratched the back of his head, feigning embarrassment, but inside, he was completely detached from the interaction. I don't even remember her in my original timeline. The clock ticked on, and 12:30 p.m. arrived. Without hesitation, he stood up, grabbing his belongings. He needed to move. Now he strode over to the teacher's desk, putting on his best innocent student face. Miss, I'm not feeling well. Can I go home early? The teacher sighed, already expecting this. Again, Sunu? You've been growing like a weed, yet you're always sick. She narrowed her eyes at him. You're not skipping to avoid the quiz, are you? Sunu smirked. I already got a perfect score, didn't I? Her lips parted in surprise, then amusement. Huh, so you usually make mistakes on purpose? Well, I suppose you've earned the right to leave. She paused, then hesitated before asking. But, are you okay? You're always by yourself at school. You're not being left out, are you? Sunu's expression didn't change, but inside, he felt a small twinge of something. Perhaps nostalgia. Perhaps irony. No, I'm just the kind of person who prefers being alone. The teacher didn't look convinced, but she let it go. All right, take care, Sunu. With that, he rushed home. The moment he arrived, he bolted into his room, shutting the door behind him. The ancient whir of the dial-up modem filled the air as he booted up his computer. The screen flickered before stabilizing, and he immediately logged into the market site. Too slow. The information site was already freezing up, bogged down by traffic. He clenched his jaw. He had minutes to act before the window of opportunity slammed shut. A message popped up on his screen. Jonathan, you online? Sunu. Yeah, the site's lagging. Any updates? It took a moment for Jonathan to reply. The delay only added to Sunu's tension. When the message finally arrived, his eyes widened. Jonathan, we've made it 300 times already. Total, $60 billion. Sunu's fingers hovered over the keyboard, his heart pounding. Even with his knowledge of the future, seeing the number in front of him felt unreal. $60 billion. A fortune beyond comprehension. He gritted his teeth. Stay focused. Jonathan continued typing. Jonathan, the opposition's starting to resist. If we pull out now, we secure our profits. If we hold on. Sunu could sense Jonathan's hesitation. The man was thinking like a rational trader, but Sunu wasn't just another trader. He was rewriting history. Sunu, don't worry about them. The announcement will completely shift the tide. Hold your nerve. We settle on my command. Jonathan hesitated, then finally replied. Jonathan, understood. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, breaking news. The Bank of Thailand announces switch to floating exchange rate system. Jonathan sent an immediate update. Jonathan, market shifting. The bot is rising fast, $31 to $33, then dropping again. It's chaos. The fluctuations were vicious. The numbers swung wildly, fortunes being made and lost in seconds. Then came the next report. Jonathan, 80% settled. Do we hold the rest? Sunu inhaled sharply. Logic dictated that they play it safe, but he knew what was coming. The crash was inevitable. Sunu, number clear, all positions. Pull everything and come to Korea as soon as possible. Jonathan didn't question him. The final transaction was executed, and then the collapse news spread like wildfire. The Thai baht plummeted to a record low. The economic shockwave rippled through all of Asia. The market was in freefall. Investors scrambled, but it was too late. Sunu leaned back in his chair, his entire body tense. Even though he had predicted this, experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. Then, Jonathan, it's done. I'm on my way. A few hours later, Jonathan arrived, looking half dead. He slumped into a chair beside Sunu. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Jonathan exhaled and held up a shaking hand. Final count, $50 billion. Sunu almost fainted. Jonathan looked no better. His hands trembled and his face was pale. I don't even know how I made it here, he muttered. Sunu's mind raced. $50 billion. It was staggering, but this was just the beginning. He clenched his fists. We need to prepare. The Asian financial crisis has only just begun. Jonathan lifted his head, eyes narrowing. What's next? Sunu smirked. Malaysia and Indonesia will hold out, but Hong Kong won't. That's our next battlefield. Jonathan's tired eyes suddenly gleamed with newfound excitement. Sunu leaned in. But first, I need a favor. There's some land in Korea we need to buy. While sleeping, Jonathan finds himself trapped in a surreal nightmare. In his dream, he is suddenly snatched up by a colossal figure, a giant looming over him with an overpowering presence. The fear grips him so tightly that he jolts awake, screaming. His sudden outburst startles Sunu, who looks at him curiously before casually noting that they have finally arrived at their destination, America. As they take a drive through the unfamiliar cityscape, Jonathan pushes away the remnants of his childish nightmare. Instead, his mind drifts back to his recent conversation with Sunu. He finds himself still puzzled over the man's ambitions. Turning to Sunu, he asks directly, "Why are you interested in buying land? Are you planning on getting into real estate as well?" Sunu, ever composed, responds without hesitation. "Real estate is just the beginning," he says, matter-of-factly. "From this day forward, we will expand into every profitable market. If it can make us good money, we'll be there." Jonathan listens carefully, but he can't help but marvel at how unshaken Sunu seems. Investing 50 billion was no small matter, yet Sunu speaks about it as if it were just another business errand. Jonathan frowns, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on him. "Are you sure nothing will happen to us?" he asks, his voice tinged with caution. Sunu merely smirks and gestures toward the meal in front of them. "Eat, you're too tense," he advises. "The first thing we need to do is split the company. Use your share as collateral, and if you want to join in, you can invest however much you wish." Jonathan exhales sharply. "How many companies are we talking about here?" he inquires, already anticipating a complex answer. "The more, the better," Sunu replies, his expression unwavering. "The structure needs to be so intricate that no one will be able to trace anything back to the original owner. Not even the employees working in the companies should fully understand what they're involved in." Jonathan leans back, processing the sheer scale of what Sunu is planning. "So, you're basically making a web of ghost companies," he mutters, shaking his head. "This almost sounds like a criminal conspiracy." Sunu chuckles at the remark. "If you're going to be working alone, it'll be tough. Once we reach Hong Kong, you should put together a team," he suggests. Jonathan raises an eyebrow. "You're actually acknowledging how hard I've been working?" he asks, half joking. "There was a point where I was so busy I didn't even have time to go to the bathroom." Sunu dismisses the notion with a wave of his hand. "Skill isn't the priority here," he says. "What matters is trust and loyalty." Jonathan thinks for a moment before nodding. "In that case, I already have a few people in mind." Sunu continues, "Once we see results in Hong Kong, we'll acquire 2 mid-sized investment companies. Find someone like Jeffrey K., an expert in the field." Jonathan's eyes widen slightly at the mention of such a high-profile name. "You're seriously aiming that high?" he asks, before smirking. "I won't complain. I'd love to have that guy working under me." Sunu nods. "We'll give them as much money as they need, but they won't be allowed to see the company's inner workings," he states firmly. "And once the company split is complete, one of them will be named Janil." Jonathan tilts his head. "Janil? Why that name?" Sunu's expression softens for a moment. "It's my father's name," he explains. "One day, I'll enjoy telling him all about it." The moment passes, and Sunu's focus sharpens once again. "For now, let's concentrate on work. The time will come when all the money in the world will be within our grasp," he says with absolute conviction. Jonathan absorbs his words, and as they continue walking, an idea takes shape in his mind. If Sunu is naming one of the companies after his father, then Jonathan will establish one called Jonathan Investment, a way to take the fame and recognition as a personal reward. He finally arrives at a designated location and pushes open the door to a room where several people are waiting for him. With a confident smile, he steps forward and declares, "We've finally made it to the major leagues. Welcome, one and all, to Jonathan Investment." Meanwhile, Sunu reflects on a different kind of entity, one not of wealth, but of destruction. He envisions a monstrous creature known as the Abyss Ant, a relentless force that moves in swarms of thousands, consuming everything in its path. To him, this perfectly symbolizes hedge funds and their powerful supporters, ruthless entities devouring profits, always hungry for more. As he reads an article, he smirks at the realization that the money originally meant for others has now fallen into his own hands. It seems as if history itself has shifted into something even more visceral. He's certain that people have already noticed that a group swooped in and monopolized on the bot drop, taking the profits all for themselves. a voice interrupts his thoughts. "President?" someone calls, bringing him back to reality. Sunu looks up. "Any updates on the contract conditions?" he asks. The man standing before him reports. Chairman Choi agreed to proceed under the specified terms. He's well known for amassing wealth through real estate, so he can be trusted on this matter. As the man continues showing him around, Sunu ponders the conditions for securing an office space. The deal includes a 2-year contract, with the entire down payment made up front in cash, but without his real name being attached to it. Naturally, this setup is completely illegal, but it's a mutually beneficial arrangement. The money will simply funnel into Chairman Choi's slush funds, ensuring that both sides profit from the exchange. Arriving at the space in question, the man gestures around. "It's already been cleaned," he says. "You just need to move in your belongings." Sunu nods, satisfied. Renting this office serves 2 key purposes: tight security and access to an ADL terminal, which will finally rid him of the slow internet speeds that have been a constant frustration. "All right," he says, pulling out the necessary funds. "I'll pay the rent now. If I deduct the cost of these 2 boxes, the amount should be just right." With that, the transaction is settled, and Sunu is left alone in the office. He looks around the empty space and thinks to himself, "Until Jonathan returns to Korea, I might as well make this place feel like home." He begins decorating, setting up a few personal touches. One of the first things he places on the wall is a drawing of a dog hybrid, an image that holds significance to him. As he steps back and examines the room, a sense of satisfaction settles over him. "This," he murmurs, "will be the first outpost." Jonathan has already begun reporting his progress, leaving the separation process to the startup companies, with 8 groups advancing to the next stage. Every time he achieves a milestone, he switches companies, ensuring that those discussing the previous separation remain unaware of his strategy. His sole focus is paperwork and numbers, with nearly 1,000 taxes accounted for, an inexplicably complex commission. However, it now seems he will have to handle the fund distribution plan himself. He inquires about Jeffrey K., and Jonathan confirms that he's in. Sunu emphasizes that prediction is their priority, but advises staying with CEO Donald Finn until the end. Jonathan wonders if this is just an investment strategy to catch Donald, and Sunu agrees it's far more than that. The economic bubble burst, triggering massive market shifts, but the real game changer was the database language they developed, which became an industry standard in the 1980s. It encompassed elements like dungeon monster skills and characteristics, but the most vital program linked back to the core company, Lee Sun's Guild. That database was a revolutionary force. If anyone had even glimpsed it, the war against the 80s could have unfolded differently. Sunu believes his intervention will alter history, so he must minimize fluctuations. He instructs Jonathan to prioritize prediction, ensuring Donald receives top recognition, salary, and stock options. However, if Donald chooses to leave, their hands will be tied. Sunu reflects and vows to seize all the power once held by the 8 virtues. Just as he prepares to leave, he notices his mother watching the news. One of his ghost companies is making headlines, but he isn't concerned. She asks him to bring this Django character over sometime, as she's heard of him but never met him. Sunu playfully fiddles with his hair and agrees. She also asks about his boxing, and when he offers to quit if she's worried, she reassures him that she's proud of his dedication to something difficult. With that, he departs, realizing he needs some pocket money. Arriving at the building where he rented a floor, Sunu pauses upon noticing employees from the public bank waiting for the elevator. He had secured the first floor to build Korea's premier online banking network. As they enter the elevator, he overhears them discussing their financial maneuvers and massive earnings. One remarks that it's almost godlike to predict such gains, while another notes a lack of market activity in the Philippines, Malaysia, and Singapore, leaving only Hong Kong as a viable option. They decide to target Hong Kong to compete with their top rivals. Sunu smirks, knowing they will never succeed. Their operations have already splintered into countless ghost companies. Later, Jonathan arrives at Sunu's office, surprised to find it resembling a gym. He attempts to exercise, but ends up injuring himself, much to Sunu's disappointment. He also notices several swords in the office and asks if Sunu can even wield them. Ignoring the remark, Sunu asks for the documents he requested. Jonathan hands him a list of paper companies, complex and numbering over 1,000. Jonathan warns that if they lost this book, they wouldn't even know how much money was at stake. Sunu, unfazed, remarks that it wouldn't disrupt the cash flow. Jonathan insists that if anyone ever saw that list, they'd be sentenced to life in prison. Sunu dismisses the concern, stating that money can resolve everything, and right now, everything they do is about creating wealth. He requests to keep the original list, and Jonathan agrees. Sunu then opens a vault and instructs Jonathan to stop using corporate cards and rely solely on cash, like a true billionaire. Before parting, Sunu tells Jonathan to take the rest of the day off, calling it a small vacation. As Jonathan leaves, he spots a series of drawings behind Sunu and smiles. These sketches prove that beneath it all, Sunu is still just a kid. At DP Crump, one of the big 4 banks in North America, Emily from Jonathan Investments meets with a representative from the bank to make a deal. He remarks that this must be the new type of swap transaction everyone is talking about, and that he will review it, along with the others, but doesn't want to waste time. He wonders who would realistically accept this offer. Emily says he should take a closer look since Jonathan's investment is party B in the deal. The representative is shocked for a moment, but tries to hold in his laughter, stating that it's not his decision to make, and he'll have to get the person in charge to review it. The person in charge begins preparing the proposal, mentioning that if the deal goes through, Hong Kong's interest would skyrocket, but Jonathan's investment's revenue would start declining. He asks how much they want for it, and Emily responds with $500 million. The man chuckles but doesn't fully laugh, thinking the offer is crazy enough to raise the interest rate to 100%. He wonders how one could even make a profit under those terms. After reviewing the papers, he decides they will sign the contract, though he knows $500 million is a significant sum and there's no fraud. They shake hands, both thinking they'd never meet again. Jonathan meets with Sunu, telling him the attack preparation is complete, and bets $5 billion, all in. Sunu says that once the debenture is over, it will be his turn. 2 months ago, Sunu arrived at Jonathan's office looking worse for wear, with a lot of trash beside him. He asks how much he lost, and Jonathan tells him he must already know, as figuring it out from the different dates and sizes was difficult. Betting on the global stock market without getting notices is quite tricky, especially with the stock market, excluding Asia, maintaining a slight upward trend. Sunu notes that even though it's hard to watch the damage that will be caused to the stock market, Jonathan looks at the screen with a depressive expression, remembering that he didn't expect to bet everything on Sunu's words. He recalls Sunu's past advice about raising the interest rate to 300% and how Hong Kong would collapse its own stock market. Jonathan doesn't want to consider that, but knowing Sunu, he probably is right. He wonders why Hong Kong would ever do something so crazy. Sunu replies that it's the only way to eliminate the traders. Jonathan wonders if they'll just give up that easily, noting that Hong Kong, along with Japan, are Asia's financial fortresses. Jonathan wants to charm Japan, but if he messes with them, the Japanese authorities won't sit idle. So, the only target left is Korea. Sunu agrees and explains that Korea implemented a financial policy that completely blocked off foreign investment and intervention. This caused the trade war in Southeast Asia, spreading fear. They also attacked Hong Kong, which had no chance against Korea, peaking in fear. Korean investors tried to withdraw, forcing foreign banks to collect their money rather than giving out loans, which caused Korea to collapse from the inside. Sunu adds that fear increases the chances of a country going bankrupt when traders pull out their long-held investments. This time, however, it will be much different. Sunu sits down, and Jonathan is surprised. Sunu suggests they enter the Hong Kong stock market and add pressure to it, with investments of 100 million to 1 billion in heavy industries. Jonathan notes that Hong Kong's stock prices are falling across all sectors except for banks. They need to reassure investors somehow. Jonathan points out that there are many investors catching up with them. Sunu worries that if they get caught, this round will be over, but it's too early for conclusions. He notes that they need to defend the New York company now. Jonathan jumps up, rushing somewhere, and Sunu considers two possibilities. Either they are being followed by traitors attacking Hong Kong, or by people wanting to join in on their actions. Jonathan announces that the trade is starting now, and Sunu congratulates him, noting that they will soon see who's really following them. Individual traders could halt at any minute, but it's different for trading firms. Sunu hopes for the best and wonders if they can collapse Hong Kong with their own hands, changing history and making the future impossible to predict. A green light flashes on the screen, and they both sit down, exhausted from the ordeal. Jonathan curses, saying that the Hong Kong stock market almost tanked. Sunu suggests organizing everything according to the market end time, as today's stock market trade made them sweat a lot. Sunu dresses to leave, thankful that nothing went wrong. However, Jonathan screams out for him and falls to his knees, telling Sun that he is wrong. The DP Crump team is gathered around a table, laughing hysterically at the sheer audacity of Jonathan's 100% interest rate deal. The man in the purple suit asks, "How much did they ask for?" And the bald man replies, 500 million. Their surprise is palpable, and they congratulate Jonathan for securing such a bold deal. Clive, the general manager at DP Crump, had expected to be fired after the loss in Thailand. But now, with this success, he's more motivated than ever. He thanks Jonathan for the investment, grateful for the chance to redeem himself. The news from Hong Kong flashes across the screen, and everyone turns their attention to it. Clive's expression shifts from curiosity to dread as he watches the numbers. Hong Kong's interest rate has surged by a staggering 400%. The room erupts into chaos, and Clive stares at the screen, overwhelmed by the implications. His mind races as he recalls the terms of Jonathan's deal, which should have led to a loss. But now, with the interest rate climbing to 400%, the $500 million deal is multiplied 4 times over, and the magnitude of the situation hits him. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Sunu are celebrating their victory as the ripple effect of the Asian financial market crisis spreads like wildfire. Not only Hong Kong, but stock markets around the world, Europe included, are collapsing. The spot and future charts plummet, and Sunu observes that they are raking in massive amounts of money. He compares the situation to a second Black Monday, where the global stock market crashes, and once again, they've hit the jackpot. Jonathan and Sunu exchange celebratory words. In this era, the sword of adversity and fortune is often labeled as fraudulent, but the power of money they control is undeniable. Jonathan's name quickly becomes synonymous with success in the trading world, and he's soon dubbed the God of Investment. One day, Jonathan calls Sunu with exciting news. They've been placed on the billionaire list. The numbers may not be entirely accurate, but they now have the power to write whatever they want about themselves. Sunu, however, expresses concern, asking if they've been tracked by the IRS, and notes that their true identities need to remain hidden. Jonathan laughs, dismissing the idea. "It would be a travesty if they ever found out about me," he says. But the one detail that remains true is that 51% of Jonathan Investment's stake is owned by a mysterious figure known only as John Doe. Sunu asks if this means everyone on Wall Street knows about them now. Jonathan assures him that he's doing everything possible to protect their identities. He's already hired top experts for the job, but Sunu remains cautious. "How close is the IRS to us?" he asks. Jonathan smirks. "We monopolized Thailand and won bets against the biggest world banks. At this point, nothing is impossible." He then reveals his latest calculations. Their New York-based company is now valued at approximately $22 billion. As of now, I'm worth $11.2 billion, Jonathan continues, and you're sitting at $10.7 billion. Sunu whistles in amazement. That puts us at 18th and 20th on the billionaire rankings. The goddess of luck really is on our side, Sunu muses. Jonathan chuckles, then leans in slightly. If we counted the money I siphoned through ghost companies, adjusted for inflation, we'd be in first and second place, easily. As they walk along the bustling street, Sunu takes in the sight of exhausted businessmen shuffling past them, their faces lined with stress. A week has passed since the Hong Kong crisis, and just as he expected, the Korean government has now turned to the IMF for a bailout, 2 weeks earlier than in the previous timeline. He sighs, remembering how his homeroom teacher had once predicted such things, though back then, none of the students, himself included, had paid attention. Who is he to judge now? As they enter a towering office building, a man greets Sunu with a polite nod. "Good morning, you look a lot like my colleague." Sunu instantly recognizes him as one of the foreign exchange members from the People's Bank. For months now, they've crossed paths, yet the man has never once identified him or Jonathan, a small but crucial oversight. Considering the chaos of recent times, it's understandable. Still, Sunu decides it's best not to engage. Without a word, he brushes past, leaving the man slightly perplexed. Inside the building, a woman sits at a table, flipping through a newspaper. A few men glance her way, blushing as they steal quick looks at her. Sunu approaches and asks, "Miss Jamie?" She lowers the paper and studies him. "Are you the interviewer? I've been waiting." They take a seat, and Sunu slides a business card across the table. The name on it reads Ethan. She picks it up, intrigued. "Is this about my appearance, or are you simply keeping an eye on your competitors?" she asks. "If this were just an interview," Sunu replies, "I wouldn't have given you my business card. We've already decided to hire you." She processes his words carefully. As if sensing her hesitation, Sunu adds, "Your past doesn't matter to us, not in the slightest. What matters is your reputation and history in Wilshireland. We need a skilled, beautiful Asian woman with expertise in real estate to represent us. You'll understand soon enough why your appearance plays such a critical role." Wilshireland had previously employed Jamie as their chief investment officer in Asia. She had been more than just a strategist. She was their shield, their bullet catcher, the face that could shift public perception in their favor. But beneath the polished exterior, she had also been willing to bend, even break, the law for her own success. Her record in the corporate world was anything but clean. As a former CEO and major shareholder, she had spent years maneuvering through high-stakes investments. But eventually, she got caught siphoning funds from her own employers. That misstep had landed her in prison. "I've been searching for someone like you since August," Sunu says. Jamie narrows her eyes. "I haven't even heard the name of your company yet." Sunu smiles, finally revealing the answer. Jonil Investment. Much later, at a major news outlet, a historic story breaks. There's been a regime change between the government and the opposition parties for the first time in the country's history. It's a monumental event, yet the weight of responsibility now falls heavily on the new presidential candidate, who must somehow revive the struggling economy. The broadcast shifts to coverage of a press conference at the Blue House, where the presidential candidate proudly announces that Jonil Investment has pledged a massive $5 billion investment, drawing both domestic and international attention. Watching the news with a calm smile, Sunu leans back, thinking to himself that the presidential candidate has essentially invited them to help overcome the foreign exchange crisis together. The political alignment with Jonil Investment was no accident. The fire exit door opens quietly, and Jamie steps into the room, dressed elegantly yet discreetly, her outfit designed to conceal her identity. Sunu greets her with a grin. Congratulations, you've become the #1 person everyone in this country's political and business worlds wants to meet. Jamie pulls down her disguise, glaring at him. Don't even mention it, she snaps, clearly irritated by the attention. Ignoring her frustration, Sunu hands her a company card and casually advises her to always keep cash in her linked account. I won't be able to get a separate report on where you use it, he adds with a knowing smile. Jamie, catching the obvious implication of embezzlement, smirks, a glint of amusement in her eyes. Sunu watches her reaction, silently affirming that he chose the right person for this role. He then asks how she plans to go about hiring new employees. Jamie, ever direct, asks, "Is it okay if I handle it my way?" Sunu nods, explaining that they'd agreed to allow free management within the capital limits. The only area he's actively involved in is handling the special orders. Good, Jamie says, leaning back comfortably. My former colleagues will be arriving this evening. I've already negotiated with the top real estate advisory companies here, and Samu Accounting and Kim and Park Law Firm will be bringing their people into the country. Between those two firms, most of the problems are already solved. She names Cho Dewan as the accounting director and Park Chun-sik to handle legal affairs. Sunu raises an eyebrow, recognizing both names as high-class players in the business world. He nods approvingly. Good choices. All that's left now is to find an office. Jamie continues, glancing around the building they're in. This place is on sale. The price will keep falling. Sunu, already aware, explains, that's because more than half of the tenants have withdrawn. The market's collapsing faster than expected. He recalls that Jamie recently had a meeting with the Blue House to fulfill the special orders he'd given. As a result, the real estate market opened up much earlier than before, creating what could only be described as a fire sale, a situation where distressed properties are sold at bargain prices. But in this case, Sunu thinks, the situation is even worse than a typical fire sale. Jamie, her real estate instincts kicking in, remarks, "This is my specialty. But I can't shake the thought that investing in just real estate is foolish. An opportunity like this won't come again." She turns to Sunu and asks, "Are your clients interested in real estate?" Sunu shrugs, his expression unreadable. "The only thing I care about is the rate of return. I don't care if it's from real estate or anything else. But with this kind of opportunity comes a lot of responsibility." Jamie's eyes narrow with determination. "The return will be big," she promises. "In this country, even a child could become a chairman, if they have dollars, that is." She glances at him, her meaning clear. "We can expand beyond real estate. There are other companies ripe for the taking." Sunu listens, thoughtful. He knows that if they move forward, a large stake in the country's biggest companies could fall into the hands of foreign investors. In the grand scheme of things, it might not be worth the risk. Jamie, sensing his hesitation, smiles knowingly. "This country," she says softly, "is amazing for business. I knew that before I came here, but now I like it even more." She thanks him for giving her this opportunity and assures him that she will show him something that aligns with his wishes. Sunu silently stares at her, and at that moment, she remembers that she also went over the special orders when she had the time. The first thing he wanted to buy was real estate, but most of the properties had earnings far below his expectations. She attempts to explain further, but Sunu interrupts her, stating that while it's admirable that she wants to impress him, she needs to stop. He clarifies that he will rarely be involved in Junil's investments and trusts her to meet customer expectations. However, her only responsibility is to follow the special orders, not to analyze them. Jimin begins shaking under his intense gaze and quickly apologizes for getting carried away. Sunu understands, but advises that if she wants to expand business through company investments, she should collaborate with the company's loan team. The special order he gave her was straightforward. Purchasing money is valuable, but there are things far more crucial in Korean dungeons. Sunu heads to a hill, reflecting on how long it took to buy and locate the dungeon. In his original timeline, the place had looked entirely different. It had resembled a military installation, as the government had been much more powerful at the time. The hills and their respective dungeons had been strictly under government control, and martial law, which seemed like a thing of the past, had been reinstated. Like him, those who had survived the examination room were labeled reservists and taken to government research facilities, where they believed they would simply become lab rats. However, when Sunu had first seen the entrance to the dungeon, he realized their fate had been far worse than that. Suddenly, a car approaches from behind him, and a man named Choi Chulman steps out. Sunu introduces himself as a representative from Junil Investment and hands Choi a card with a fake name. As they continue driving up the mountain, Choi asks where the construction site is. Sunu explains that the entire area from the hill's entrance is their work site. He wants the restoration work to be as close to the original as possible, starting at the entrance. After about 20 minutes of driving, the truck gets stuck, unable to climb any further. They exit the vehicle, and Sunu asks if Choi is capable of constructing buildings as well. Choi responds that he can build anything. He isn't picky. Sunu then asks if he can also construct a road and if he is truly capable of handling the entire project. The work needs to begin immediately, though Sunu acknowledges that the scale is large and winter conditions will be challenging. Choi hesitates for a moment. Demolishing an entire mountain, constructing a road, and erecting buildings would be a massive undertaking. But in the current economy, work is scarce, and he can't afford to miss this opportunity. He accepts the job. As he gets back into the car, Sunu instructs him to provide a completion timeline and cost estimate as soon as possible. While he intends to get estimates from other companies, he makes it clear that he prefers Choi for the job. Choi, curious, asks why Sunu specifically wants him. In response, Sunu glances at a picture of Choi's daughter and says, "It's a difficult time for fathers everywhere." Choi, visibly moved, begins to tear up and sincerely thanks Sunu for his kindness.
At night, his father stumbles in, clearly intoxicated. Sunu reflects that it's the last day of the year, and even in the past, his dad would often come home in this state, especially since this day marked the anniversary of his honorary retirement, a sort of quiet end to his career. But tonight, things are different. His father announces that he's about to start working at a well-known company, Junil Investments. To Sunu's surprise, his father even mentions that he'll be using the name Sunu himself. Sunu scratches his cheek, taken aback. He never saw this coming. Years ago, his father's influence had drawn Sunu into the world of finance. He remembered when his father gave him a bank book containing over 1,001, an enormous sum for a high school student. After the IMF crisis, even ordinary people had started to make money, and before he knew it, Sunu had become a successful high school trader. He was so fortunate that he even asked his father for more investments, which his father gladly provided. But things took a turn for the worse when the dot-com bubble burst. Half of his money disappeared, and shortly afterward, his father asked for repayment. Sunu cried over the loss of both his father's money and his own, and his father coldly suggested he borrow from his mother to pay him back. When Sunu questioned how that was possible, his father explained that if he couldn't repay, he'd have to forfeit his allowances, his CD player, his phone, and his computer. However, none of that would cover the debt. His father then advised him to be obedient and ask his mother for help. Sunu had been frustrated and confused, but he understood his father's perspective. He knew his situation wasn't as dire as his father's had been when he had lost his career. Now, his father was getting another chance, and Sunu wondered whether he'd ever be as interested in the economy as his father had been in stocks. He could only hope that his own situation would improve. Meanwhile, construction begins on the new project, and President Choi appears to have secured the deal, giving him newfound confidence. But not everyone is happy about the changes. As they drive away from the site, Sunu suggests they build a meeting hall to help comfort the villagers. Choi dismisses the idea, saying he had already spoken with the village head. Sunu insists, mentioning that the villagers have lived off the land for years, picking mushrooms and keeping bees. Choi responds that they were doing so without permission in the first place. Sunu insists they should limit access to the mountain by installing wire mesh around its base. Choi is surprised by this, but Sunu explains that this move is necessary to prevent outsiders from entering. But in his head, he was thinking about dungeons. He also notes that because the company is foreign, certain aspects of the project can't be adjusted. He urges Choi to manage the villagers' reactions. Though reluctant, Choi agrees. Elsewhere, at Jonil Investments, Accounting Director Jo Duan and Judicial Affairs Director Park Chun-sik share drinks while discussing the company's future. Duan stresses that they shouldn't waste time and should approach their goals directly. Park laughs, and Duan notes that they are now in this together. They both toast to Jonil Investments' success. Duan brings up Kim Chaman, the chief, saying it would be foolish to discard him. Park mentions that the late director, Cheek, had blocked the efforts of a certain yellow-haired individual, but Duan thinks they can still work things out. However, Park points out that dragging Cheeman into their plans might be risky, with low rewards. Duan believes they just need to be patient, as waiting a bit longer will allow them to align with what Western investors are looking for. Duan glances at the key to the company car and muses that if all goes well, this could lead to something much bigger. Park asks if such a thing has happened before, and Dowan scoffs, knowing they are corrupt at the core, and there's little they can do about it. He's confident that as long as they keep the VIP's content, everything will work out. He plans to divide the profits with the chief and ensure the Westerners get their share. They both cheer, hopeful for the upcoming year. January 1998 arrives, and the financial landscape shifts dramatically. Many companies go bankrupt, and restructuring announcements lead to widespread unemployment. Sunu observes that while things haven't changed drastically, the finer details have. The DP Crump and German Bank were supposed to enter earlier, but they held off until the second quarter of the year. Sunu suspects this was because they had lost so much in previous bets. Now they're eager to take advantage of the situation, knowing that the entire country is in a financial freefall. He predicts they'll extract as much as possible before things stabilize. However, things don't go as expected. It seems that Diwan, the chairman, has been arrested. The top three conglomerates in South Korea are Dion, Do, and Ilung. Do ranks second in the financial world, outshining Ilung, and is also highly recognized internationally. In comparison, Daeon holds the top spot with an extensive network of over 400 companies globally, employing 100,000 people in Korea and twice that number abroad. Jamie asks Sunu if he is familiar with Do Group, and he affirms it. She mentions that an arrest warrant will soon be issued for the chairman, which catches him off guard. Sunu inquires about the reason behind this move, especially since the collapse of DO didn't happen immediately after the IMF crisis, but 2 years later. He wonders why they would target a company like DO, which was functioning normally. Jamie explains that the two directors hired after the CEO's appointment, Cho Do-won and Park Chun-sik, are now influential political figures. They were placed in these roles to serve DU's interests, and their political success helped facilitate putting the DU group on the list. She adds that it took her time to understand how things work in this country, but now has a clearer perspective. Sunu remarks that corruption exists everywhere, with North America legalizing lobbying and making it more transparent. While this makes things seem similar, he acknowledges that the term conglomerate has a unique significance here. He apologizes for interrupting and assures Jamie that her clients will be pleased to see Do on the list. Jamie continues, stating that the two directors plan to make Do a scapegoat for the IMF crisis. as no one had taken responsibility for the global criticism against DU. Sunu doubts that the authorities will easily approve this, but Jamie notes that this is precisely why she's involved. She expects to meet with the financial world's leaders soon. Sunu smirks, speculating that this moment must have triggered DU's downfall. He reflects on the survival rates of educated elites, noting how even in peaceful times, many focus on advancing their own interests by attacking those more powerful than themselves. He admires both Jamie and the directors for their strategic approach. Jamie reveals that the government has handed over all of DU's files to the court. Sunu asks what their demands are. Jamie states that they require a $500 million investment and full control over the DU group, including its liabilities. However, with more effort, they could just take out the primary subsidiary. Sunu believes Jamie still has a lot to learn about Korea's political and financial systems, and adds that once the financial crisis is under control, the authorities will likely conduct thorough tax investigations. He notes that the two Korean directors aren't interested in assets or sales. Their main goal is to keep DU in the top 3 conglomerates, not just as a company, but within the entire infrastructure. Sunu then asks if Jamie is truly ready to take over DU and if she plans to hire international management specialists afterward. Surprised, Jamie admits that was likely her plan. Sunu suggests she start by investigating the new chairman and the board members, focusing particularly on the chairman's closest aides, excluding family members. Jamie notes that this aligns with what the directors advised her. She asks if this means he's giving the green light for the takeover. Sunu cautions her not to rush and assures her that they, as clients, don't need to worry about additional investments or business directions. She should focus on being aggressive in her approach. He asks if she fully understands the weight of this responsibility. He gazes at her with an intense, piercing look, reminding her that whether it's land, assets, or even the company itself, she cannot allow any of it to be taken. Ganil Investments will dominate, and they must control the crisis in Korea. Jonathan steps off the plane, immediately surrounded by a swarm of reporters. The blinding lights and constant flashes exhaust him. They fire off a barrage of questions until one reporter asks where he should invest to grow wealthy as well. The others criticize the question, but Jonathan enjoys it, replying that if he were to invest in just one thing, it would be fear. Son, HHO, holding a paper with this quote, mocks him for it. Jonathan sharply tells him to stop being childish. Son remarks on Jonathan's grand reception, to which Jonathan admits he barely escaped the chaos but didn't expect to be treated like a state guest. Son hands him a beer, suggesting this only reflects the desperation of the country, prompting Jonathan to comment that there's still hope, especially with financial assistance from the IMF flowing in and millions of dollars being injected. Son agrees, predicting Korea will likely recover quickly from the IMF crisis. Jonathan asks if Son is truly committed to the plan. Son assumes he's referring to the Deo situation, admitting that while it wasn't his original idea, it's something they are actively working on. Jonathan asks if they refers to Jill's investment group. Son confirms, revealing that they've set the wheels in motion, handing the blade to others who are now taking action. Jonathan presses him, asking if he really plans on taking control of the entire Deo group. Son acknowledges that it might happen, explaining that restructuring and handling the subsidiaries are urgent priorities. Jonathan points out that the sequence of action seems all wrong, but asks why Son is approaching it with such high risk. Son responds that the dollar won't sustain the economy indefinitely. As Korea recovers from the IMF crisis, it's preparing for what comes next. Jonathan notes that his loyalty to Korea seems to be more than just financial gain. Son admits there's more to it and adds that Jonathan will eventually understand his true intentions. Jonathan counters, suggesting that Sun doesn't need to be embarrassed about his patriotism, especially after earning so much. He can do as he pleases. At that moment, Sun demands an additional billion on top of the original $1.5 billion for their operations. They're planning to move a total of $25 billion into the country, aligning it with their takeover plans for Dio. Jonathan breaks into a sweat, urging Sun to reconsider. At this rate, he warns, he could be facing life imprisonment. He cautions them not to trust their current actions too much, as the tax authorities could easily find a way to charge him. Sun interrupts him, saying the rush is on the Korean government, not them. He stands up and points out that this is their chance to make the $25 billion completely legitimate. Jonathan asks how the Korean government could let them do this, to which Sun calmly states it's their problem to solve, while they just need to present the numbers. Jonathan smirks, takes a sip of his beer, and reflects on how he managed to involve an entire country in his scheme. The Deo Group underwent a financial restructuring after a deep dive into their tax records was completed. Surprisingly, there was no high-profile resignation from the CEO, which would usually be expected in such a scenario. Apart from the chairman's family, the rest of the employees kept their jobs. At school, Sunwoo checks in with Jimin about the progress of the acquisition. She mentions they have some rivals in the process, but assures him that soon enough, they'll come out on top. He remarks on her expanding vocabulary, and she brings up the topic of liability distribution. However, he brushes it off, suggesting they revisit the discussion another time. Feeling that the whole matter with Deo is nearly wrapped up, he turns his attention to the beaten-up group in front of him, ordering them to stand. They obey immediately. He makes it clear that he won't interfere with their activities as long as they don't cross his path. They quickly acknowledge his warning, and he lets them go, thinking to himself that these guys were never even worth his time for training. Scratching his head, he wonders how he's going to deal with school this time. What excuse should he use now? Just as he's contemplating this, his homeroom teacher appears at a window, calling him inside. She explains that the other students aren't resentful toward him, but rather intimidated. Sunwoo finds this situation odd. He remembers this teacher being someone entirely different in this period of time. Though it didn't seem like a big deal at first, her behavior has been growing more concerning lately. She tries to convince him that if he were to make an effort, he'd see that school isn't so bad. Of course, he knows that's a blatant lie. Then, she asks him to make her a promise, to at least graduate from middle school. That catches him off guard. Now, he's certain he needs to investigate this further. During class, Sunwoo reflects on how he hired professional detectives to look into his homeroom teacher over the past few days. Her name is Woo Yanhee, a 22-year-old born in Seoul. She's the eldest daughter of an ordinary family, someone with little interest in fashion and barely any social interactions, so much so that she doesn't even seem to have a single close friend. Up to this point, she appeared to be just a regular, introverted teacher. But there were two details that stood out. First, she already knew who he was before she ever became his teacher, and had a strange habit of fixating on seemingly random people. While not exactly disturbing, it was certainly unusual. The real issue: he was one of the people she was interested in. From the moment she passed the employment test, she had been determined to become his homeroom teacher specifically. Second, she had a documented history of psychiatric treatment. The prescriptions she received were standard medications for anxiety and depression, but despite taking them, she continued to report the same symptoms. This gradual deterioration led to her cutting ties with her family. However, the real kicker: the medicine wouldn't have made a difference no matter how much she took, because her so-called delusions, what others dismissed as nonsense, were real. Sunwoo never expected to encounter another awakened individual in this way, let alone a rare mind healer. Later that night, as he sits in his office, he reflects on the rarity of mind healers, not just because of their abilities, but also due to how few survive after awakening. Their power allows them to influence people's minds without speaking a word, but the awakening process itself is brutal. Most don't make it through the ordeal, overwhelmed by the mental strain of the awakened around them. Those who do survive often find themselves mentally shattered. For Wu Yanhee, the experience was even more difficult because she awakened at such a young age. Sunwoo is certain of one thing: there's a dark reason why her name never made it into the records of this timeline.
Just then, Sunu's phone rings. It's Jonathan. He keeps it brief, saying the job is done and throwing in a remark about being a stubborn Texan. Sunu smirks as they end the call, relieved that Jonathan came through. A few days earlier, Jonathan had handed him some documents. Sunu wasn't thrilled. It looked more like a retirement plan than an investment strategy. Jonathan had defended it, arguing they needed stability rather than reckless expansion. Sunu admitted that putting money into the Dow index wasn't a terrible idea, but it wasn't exactly exciting either. The portfolio in question was just $1 billion, and given their current position, Sunu figured they had earned at least 3 times that by now. He was curious about Jonathan's strategy, especially since he had insisted on splitting the shares and managing things independently. If Jonathan thought their earnings were limited to that, he was way off. But Jonathan quickly corrected him. Their total assets were closer to $6.5 billion. Even if they stopped making money today and just spent freely, their fortune would keep growing. Sunu considered saying something but held back. No need to bring that particular person into the conversation. Jonathan, however, had his own thoughts. He speculated that Sunu's real ambition was to challenge the so-called God of Finance, a figure with an estimated net worth in the quadrillions. This man wasn't just a financial legend. He had literally founded a nation and shaped the course of global conflicts. But Sunu wasn't chasing statistics. If that were his goal, he wouldn't have gone to such extreme lengths. He told Jonathan he had no grand plan. He was simply hungry for more. He chuckled, thinking that hungry for more had a nice ring to it. Maybe he'd save that line for a future client. Jonathan, puzzled, asked what client he was referring to. Sunu shifted the conversation, asking if there weren't smaller investment firms merging right now. Jonathan sat in silence, prompting Sunu to snap at him, warning that he should turn down interviews and public appearances. If he let himself get too distracted, it could cost them. Jonathan didn't argue, but he admitted something else. He avoided hiring people better than him because he feared they'd realize they didn't need him. That was why he kept a low profile. But he insisted that Sunu should be the one at the EO forefront. Sunu rejected the idea immediately. He already knew why that wouldn't work. Instead, he urged Jonathan to have confidence. Even if they had never met, Jonathan would have succeeded. Maybe not on this scale, but he had potential. Jonathan conceded the point, but insisted it wouldn't have been to this level. He also apologized, admitting that stress had been getting to him. Sunu rolled his eyes, telling him that this was exactly why he had been pushing him to exercise. His waistline wasn't looking great, and a strong body meant a strong mind. It was time for him to stop holding himself back and start proving what he was capable of. Once their company expanded, Jonathan would finally understand the power he had within him. Jonathan still seemed doubtful, but Sunu pressed on, asking if he realized that Bluestone's key players were currently in Korea. At the mention of Bluestone, Jonathan's expression shifted. That firm was the largest private placement investment company in the world. He hesitated, then asked if Sunu planned to take them down. Sunu dismissed the idea outright. If Bluestone had taken a hit during the Asian financial crisis, they might have struggled, but they had survived. Now, however, there was a gap, an opportunity. Bluestone Capital Partners had launched their BCP3 fund, and Sunu knew all about it. Jonathan shook his head in disbelief. "You must have a crystal ball," he muttered. He confirmed that Bluestone was pouring everything into expanding their product. Sunu smirked. Without their Korea-based members, Bluestone's new fund would be practically worthless. Jonathan needed to start destabilizing them from the ground up. He was more than capable of doing it. That decision led them to join forces. Bluestone itself was an impressive target, but Sunu had his sights set on something more specific, their subsidiary, Blue Rock. 2 decades from now, 3 key figures, Kim Chung-gu, Gillen, and Jessica, would transform Blue Rock from an unremarkable asset management firm into a financial powerhouse. At its peak, it would control over $4 trillion in funds. But right now, Blue Rock was nothing, and Sunu intended to keep it that way. The real power behind the world's shadow banking system The invisible force controlling the global economy would belong to someone else entirely. As he sits on the plane, he reflects on how his parents believe he's off to Bible school. In reality, that's just a cover. His true purpose is heading to America to handle some pressing matters. His first objective is to recruit Gillen and Jessica before they commit to Blue Rock. The second is to locate Kim Chung-gu, a brilliant analyst whose talents are being stifled within a private investigative firm called Zopi. Upon arrival, he meets with John Clark, the lead investigator at Zopi. They shake hands, and Sunu introduces himself using a fake name, Eden. As they settle into their seats, John acknowledges the rumor that Sunu is managing a trust fund and is seeking its rightful recipient. Sunu plays along, aware that investigating missing persons requires proving familial ties, while tracking down a fugitive demands some legal connection to the case. However, finding a beneficiary for a trust is far simpler. Keeping things above board for now, he states that he's searching for a boy named Bobby, a Brooklyn native between 12 and 15 years old, who is likely still residing in New York. John presses for more details, and Sunu admits he only has a physical description. The rest of the information has been lost. John points out that with such limited data, tracking Bobby down will be expensive and time-consuming, essentially requiring a search spanning all of North America. Sunu acknowledges the difficulty but makes it clear, money is not an issue. The reward for the beneficiary will more than cover the costs, so John should spare no resources in the search. With his fists clenched, Sunu reminds himself that this mission is non-negotiable. He must find Bobby, the leader of the 8 evils, the one who will later be known as New York's first evil. At Jonathan Investments, Sunu introduces Gillen, announcing that he will be entrusted with offshore funds amounting to a staggering $1.5 billion. Jonathan is taken aback by the sheer scale of the transaction. Even if Gillen has connections to a reputable organization, this level of trust is unprecedented. Sunu assures him that Gillen will soon prove himself more than capable of leading operations on the front lines. Handing Jonathan a laptop, Sunu calls it a small gift. As Jonathan examines the screen, he realizes it's not just an autobiography, it contains groundbreaking investment analysis. His shock deepens when he understands that the same methodology used to evaluate their financial moves is right in front of him. He asks Sunu if he holds a doctorate or similar qualifications. Sunu expected this reaction. After all, the information he provided includes theories not yet discovered in this world. He clarifies that he isn't the author, purposefully leaving the introduction blank. If this book is ever published under his name, his expertise will become undeniable. Jonathan is momentarily speechless, but eventually relents, recognizing the power of what he's been given. However, he insists that Sunu drop the formalities. Rank and age don't matter anymore. They are no longer just business associates. They should consider each other friends. Sunu hesitates, recalling his past life. There was no space for friendships between the awakened. He had shared loot and rewards with Jonathan before, but this Jonathan is not the same as the one he once knew. Still, perhaps having a single friend isn't such a bad thing. They fist bump, solidifying an unexpected bond. Sometime later, at school, a teacher informs the class that Yoni will be taking a leave of absence for personal reasons. Sunu considers the situation. Since spring break ended, there had been some drama. Yoni's mother had stormed into the school, outraged that they had hired someone with mental health issues. Due to this disruption, Sunu had to put his plans to confirm whether Yoni was truly awakened on hold. Today, however, is critical. It's the last chance he has to strengthen himself before the trial begins. Arriving at a building of his own design, he stands before a highly secure facility, a dungeon entrance disguised as a psychiatric hospital. Entering the premises, he notes that Choi has done an excellent job. If things go well, he might even rebrand the company as Ilu Construction. If he survives, that is. Inside, he steps into a room where a portal materializes before him. The system prompts him, asking if he truly wishes to proceed. Even though this dungeon is considered low tier, he's diving in without an emergency escape mechanism, an undeniably reckless move. But at this stage, there's no other viable way to boost his stats. Resolute, he selects yes. A staircase reveals itself, spiraling downward into the unknown. Gripping his flashlight, he shines it into the entrance, but as expected, the beam is swallowed by the darkness. Electronics and firearms are useless here. The only thing he can rely on is the sword he forged in Nam Daemon. With no turning back, he steps forward. Jonathan glanced at his inbox and noticed a message from Sunu. Curiosity sparked within him. What elaborate scheme had he devised this time? But as he opened the email, his excitement quickly faded. A will? Meanwhile, deep inside the dungeon, Sunu fought for his survival. The vicious hound-like beasts refused to give him a moment's respite. One lunged forward, sinking its teeth into his shoulder. Gritting his teeth through the pain, he drove his blade into its eye, but there was no time to breathe. Another was already pouncing. He attempted to wrench his sword free, but his wounded arm slowed him down. The beast knocked him to the ground, its jaws snapping mere inches from his face. In a desperate final effort, he plunged his weapon into its throat just before it could tear him apart. With 3 of the creatures slain, he pulled himself together, analyzing his foes. These were classified as KF7, often referred to as hounds, a type of soldier beast that, while not the strongest, were still a challenge for someone with mere F-rank stats. His predicament was made worse by the dungeon's shifting layout. The area where the hounds had attacked was just past the entrance, but with the terrain constantly changing, predicting what lay ahead was impossible. To escape this dungeon, 3 missions had to be completed: a boss fight, a hunting challenge, and a duel. The only other way out was by using an escape seal, which he knew could be earned through the hunting quest. That was precisely why he had chosen this dungeon. He already had a plan for dealing with the boss, but right now that plan seemed useless when even a simple hunting challenge was pushing him to his limits. As he trudged forward, his steps halted at the sight of a dungeon box. Many newcomers were fooled by its resemblance to a standard bronze treasure chest. If luck was on his side, it would grant a reward. If not, it could afflict him with a crippling curse, paralyzing fear, or disorienting confusion. Given his current state, he wasn't about to take any chances. Pressing on, he finally reached a large door. He let his bag drop to the floor, exhaling deeply before reaching for the handle. A silent plea escaped him. "Just one scout, please." But luck had abandoned him long ago. As the door creaked open, a sea of glowing eyes stared back. A horde of hounds awaited, poised to strike. With no choice left, he activated his abilities, channeling Odin's fury into his blade. Without hesitation, he burst through the entrance, unleashing his rage upon the beasts. His sword tore through them as the system's notifications updated his kill count. But his strength was running low. One of the creatures clamped its jaws onto his weapon, forcing him to a standstill. His F-rank body simply wasn't strong enough to overpower them. More hounds swarmed, closing in from every direction. Blood, his own, spattered across the stone floor. He gritted his teeth. He wasn't done yet. Sunu lies sprawled on the ground, surrounded by the lifeless bodies of the hounds he had slain. He's completely unconscious until he suddenly jolts awake, gasping for air and hacking uncontrollably. As he struggles to rise, his whole body trembles. His first instinct is to check his list of attributes. It dawns on him that he had activated Man of Adversity and then slept for nearly an entire day, 23 hours to be exact. The realization hits him hard. He never expected to rely on that skill so soon, not in the very first room of the dungeon, but at least it worked. Without it, his injuries would have been severe. He might have even lost a hand. Next, he pulls up his quest log. Only 4 hounds remain, and his total points sit at 204. He does some quick calculations. Each soldier must have been worth 2 points, and a bronze loot box costs 300. The tutorial rewards are surprisingly generous. If he takes out just 4 more enemies, he can finally escape. Before he can dwell on it any further, movement at the doorway catches his eye. 2 hounds slink into the room, their eyes locked onto him. He grips his weapon, bracing for the inevitable attack. But strangely, they don't lunge right away. Instead, they seem to be waiting. Then, he sees why. A monstrous 2-headed hound steps into the room behind them. Sunu's blood runs cold. This isn't a normal enemy. This is a great contest quest, a boss fight. But why would such a powerful creature appear this early? There's no time to question it. The beast lunges, swiping at him twice in rapid succession. He barely manages to evade both attacks. The sheer speed and force confirm his fears. This thing is at least an A rank. Even with Man of Adversity, he doesn't stand a chance. Desperate, he hurls one of his swords toward the creature. His aim is off. It strikes a lesser hound instead. The boss charges after him, relentless. With no other options, he makes a split-second decision. He dashes for the dungeon box. Another vicious swing comes inches from slicing him apart, but he twists away at the last moment and grabs the box. Just as he does, the 2-headed hound's jaws clamp onto his leg. In sheer desperation, he shouts for the box to open. Then, salvation. The box grants him an escape stamp. Without hesitation, He activates it. His body is yanked away just as the hound prepares to tear into him. The next thing he knows, he's back at the dungeon entrance, landing hard on the ground. Dazed, he staggers to his feet, barely comprehending what just happened, and then it hits him. He throws his head back and laughs. The escape stamp had been in the dungeon box all along. No wonder the 8 virtues and 8 evils were so obsessed with this system. It was brutal, a game designed to push people to their absolute limits before offering them an out. Catching his breath, he picks up his phone. The screen is flooded with missed calls, 30 of them, all from Jonathan. No doubt his friend is panicking. Sunu sighs. He'll call him back later. Right now, there's someone else he needs to talk to. He dials Yoni, his teacher. When she answers, she sounds utterly shocked. You're alive? A short while later, she arrives at the hospital to meet him. The moment she lays eyes on him, she freezes. His battered state is alarming, but there's something else. Hesitation. This place, it's a mental hospital, she says warily. Sunu waves off her concern. Ignore the sign. It's just a front. There's no one else here but us. That only seems to unsettle her more. That makes it worse. This whole thing is insane. I know it is, but I can't explain why. He gives a knowing smile. I understand. That's why I called you. He studies her for a moment, sensing the turmoil within her. If she had fully honed her abilities, she'd already know what he was thinking. But she still has a long way to go, so he gives her a choice. Right here, right now, you decide. Are you going to go back to living a life where people call you crazy, or are you going to follow me? Once inside, he introduces her to a monstrous hound, leaving her visibly shaken. He quickly reassures her that it's merely a fragment of his memories, nothing real. Yan's abilities are still developing, but he's managed to share glimpses of his past with her. She trembles, and he wonders if this is too much for her to handle. Yan hesitantly asks if they were truly chosen to battle these creatures, and if the world is really at risk of an attack. Sunu confirms her fears, explaining that he has been preparing for this moment. Beneath the stairwell, an entire swarm of the same beasts awaits. He hands her a folder, revealing a contract. If she agrees to join him in raiding dungeons, she will be compensated generously. However, if she refuses, she should live as if none of this ever happened, at least until the inevitable day arrives. He walks her to the door, telling her she has until tomorrow to decide. This isn't just any choice. It's a life or death commitment. Yan has been seeing strange visions since middle school, the first being a mysterious blue window only visible to her. When she confided in her mother, she was taken to a prayer house. Then, without warning, she started sensing the emotions of those around her, trying to decipher their significance, yet nothing concrete ever surfaced. Among the countless individuals, she encountered one presence stood out the most, Sunu. At first, she thought he might hold answers, but now she realizes she's in way over her head. The contract details are staggering. An immediate payment of 200 million won, an annual salary of 1 billion won, a 500 million won incentive for each dungeon expedition, and another 500 million for making it back alive. Even in death, the payout is an astonishing 3 billion won. She can't help but wonder where he's getting such vast sums of money. The sheer enormity of it all makes her feel as though she's been cursed. Determined, she seeks out Sunu. He watches as she lowers her car window, her exhaustion evident in her eyes. Without needing her to say a word, he understands her choice. Welcoming her into this new reality, he acknowledges her as someone on the brink of awakening. As they drive off, he gently advises her to slow down, teasing that she's going a bit too fast. Then he asks if she's doing this solely out of a sense of duty toward him. She shakes her head, saying it's quite the opposite. She's grateful. Before he revealed the truth, she could only think about how meaningless her life felt. Rejecting the money makes no sense, and besides, this proves she isn't insane, right? Sunu, however, notices her trembling hands and points out that she's only pretending to be fearless. She questions whether he truly possesses such wealth, to which he replies that she'll see for herself soon enough. After a moment of silence, she eyes him suspiciously, demanding to know why he's been speaking so informally with her. Is he older than he looks? Sunu exhales and vaguely admits that age will soon be irrelevant in the world they're about to step into. She will understand soon enough. They arrive at their destination, where a man named Jonathan immediately reacts with shock at the sight of Sunu. He asks if he wasn't being followed, given his fame. But Jonathan quickly realizes arguing is pointless and drops the matter. Yan glances at him, a thought forming in her mind. Could he be the hunter Jonathan? Sunu confirms it, urging them to exchange introductions. After all, this is the man who will oversee their contract, the renowned investor and one of the world's top billionaires, known as the God of Investment. Yanhee steps out of the office, still in disbelief that she now possesses 200 million won. As she takes in the moment, she crosses paths with Jonathan. From the window, he watches her leave and turns to Sunwoo, questioning why on earth he would give someone that much money. He also brings up the fact that if she were to disappear, her father would be compensated with an even more staggering sum, 3 billion won. "What's going on here?" he demands. Sunwoo apologizes, saying he can't explain everything just yet, but promises to reveal it soon. For now, he suggests they focus on their meal, mentioning that he ordered a selection of dishes Jonathan likes. As they eat, Jonathan comments on the food, noting that it's decent but not extraordinary. Sunwoo explains that their usual go-to restaurant, the one Jonathan was particularly fond of, has shut down. This revelation surprises Jonathan, who remarks that things must be getting bad if even a high-quality eatery couldn't survive. Sunwoo nods and expands on the topic, saying this isn't just an issue in their country, it's a global trend. When asked about the foreign investments that had been funneled into Asia, Jonathan correctly identifies that a significant portion ended up in Eastern Europe and Latin America. Sunwoo adds that there's one more major player Jonathan overlooked. Russia curious. Jonathan quickly looks up some data and is taken aback by the sheer number of nuclear weapons Russia holds. "They're practically untouchable," he mutters. Sunwoo smirks. "That's what most people think," he replies. "But we're going there." He then shifts the conversation, bringing up a previous discussion where Jonathan had asked about Jillian's recruitment. Jonathan clarifies that he wasn't doubting Jillian's abilities. After all, she's a member of the Morgan Group. But he had been wondering whether Sunwoo personally stepped in to bring her on board. Sunwoo dismisses the concern, saying, "They need to focus on a bigger game. Competing with Russia is the key, and the first to rise will reap the rewards." But he assures Jonathan that he won't be left empty-handed. As a consolation, he'll introduce him to someone nearly as skilled as Jillian, Brian, also known by his Korean name, Kim Chung-soo. He might not seem like much at first, but with proper guidance, he could prove to be a hidden gem. Jonathan sighs, thinking that if all he has to do is sit back and observe, he might finally get some much-needed rest. Sunwoo shuts that down immediately. There's no time to relax. They need to escalate things. A massive event is on the horizon, a sale of Russian government bonds, and they're going to burn through $1 billion in the process. Later, while on a flight, Jonathan leans back in his seat, smirking, despite the sweat forming on his brow. "Russia is doomed," he murmurs. "The game is on." Sunwoo, meanwhile, reflects on the key players now in motion: Jonathan, Jillian, Jessica, and Changu, the so-called knights of the financial empire. It's time to prepare for the next step. Elsewhere, a tense scene unfolds. Sunwoo orders Yanhee to stab him. Her hands tremble as she grips the knife, unable to steady herself. She hesitates, voicing her doubts, saying that something about this feels horribly wrong. Sunwoo remains firm. "If this were a dungeon, you'd be dead by now, several times over," he tells her. He reminds her of the contract she signed. Paragraph 1 states that all orders related to dungeon operations are absolute. Training for the dungeon is included. Did she really forget? He considers the ability Yanhee demonstrated earlier. At first glance, it didn't seem particularly noteworthy, but then he discovered something unusual. She possesses the sensitivity trait, which allows her to pick up on the emotions of those around her in an unpredictable manner. This ability alone is difficult to rank even among hunters. However, what truly caught his interest was a rare skill: Mary's touch. It has a unique effect. It dramatically reduces a target's inability to fight. The catch? It can only be used once every 24 hours. It's an ability he's never seen before, and he needs to test its exact limits. His theory? The skill transfers an injury from one person to another. Right now, Yanhee is undergoing brutal training, learning both to attack and to endure pain. Sunwoo acknowledges that it's harsh, but time is running out. If she hesitates like this in a real dungeon, they'll both be dead. "Stop hesitating," he commands. "Do it." Finally, Yanhee forces herself to act. She thrusts the knife forward. Afterward, as the bleeding is stabilized, Mary's touch activates. The pain vanishes, but the wound itself remains. With Mary's touch, the wound faded, but in its place, the adversary's trait intensified. However, Yan bore the brunt of it, her body racked with pain. Watching her struggle, Sunu couldn't help but wonder, how could someone so small endure something so close to death? Could she truly wield Mary's touch inside the dungeon without hesitation? After what seemed like an eternity, she finally opened her eyes and groggily asked how long she'd been unconscious. Sunu informed her it had been a full 12 hours. She admitted that at first, she thought she wouldn't survive. But in the end, it wasn't as unbearable as expected. Sunu, however, cautioned her. She might feel fine now, but that was only because of the painkillers. She needed to take it easy for the next few days. As he slipped on his jacket, he mentioned he'd be heading out for a while but would return later. In the meantime, she should focus on resting and regaining her strength. Yan met his gaze and assured him she would. After all, orders related to the dungeon were absolute, weren't they? Sunu soon arrived at Gal Investments, requesting a meeting with his father. At that moment, his father was engaged in conversation with a colleague, but when he spotted Sunu, he naturally introduced him. The colleague took a moment to appraise the young man before commenting on how strikingly handsome he was. Curious, he inquired about Sunu's university, only to be taken aback when Sunu's father revealed that he was still in middle school. The man, clearly impressed, remarked that having such a dependable son must be a great source of pride. Then, in a surprising gesture, he handed Sunu some pocket money. Though Sunu was technically the boss of the company, he accepted it with a polite nod. Walking side by side down the street, his father explained that he had always wanted to show Sunu the company firsthand. But there was more. He had something important to discuss. He had been promoted not once, but twice, and had kept it a secret, planning to surprise Sunu's mother that very evening. Not only that, but starting tomorrow, he would officially be working at the foreign exchange bank. The news caught Sunu off guard. His father admitted he had pushed hard for this opportunity, but wasn't sure if he had made the right decision. He patted Sunu's shoulder and mused about their country's financial state, hinting at the importance of understanding economics. He added that he would be proud if Sunu took an interest in it as well. Then, the moment Sunu had been waiting for arrived. His father handed him a bank account, his talisman, finally back in his possession. He advised Sunu to carefully consider which stocks to invest in and to consult him beforehand. Sunu knew that this account was what had propelled him into the world of finance. It was what had enabled him to navigate the treacherous waters of Wall Street. And now, as the gears of fate began to turn, he realized this was the start of a new ripple effect. With this, the final preparations for the dungeon were complete. At the psychiatric facility, Yan practices with a crossbow, demonstrating impressive skill. Sunu observes her accuracy, but doubts whether she can actually pierce flesh. Regardless, close combat isn't an option for her. He reminds her that they'll be entering the dungeon the next day. When she asks if there's anything left to prepare, he dryly suggests she write a farewell letter. Her chances of making it out alive are slim. Inside the dungeon, Sunu immediately begins cutting through monstrous hounds while Yan watches paralyzed. The reality of the dungeon is far harsher than she imagined. Everything here exists solely to kill. The line between human and monster feels thinner than ever. Sunu, injured in battle, yells for her to heal him, and she manages to restore a portion of his wounds. Freed from the pile of bodies that had trapped him, he commends her for not breaking down too quickly. As a reward for completing the hunting quest, the system grants them an escape seal. Sunu claims it without hesitation, and, to his surprise, Yan doesn't protest, despite knowing it's one of the few ways to leave this nightmare. As they continue, Sunu acknowledges the advantage of having a healer. Alone, he'd be forced to endure every wound. He never expected to partner with someone from the spiritual world. Those with such abilities were typically ruthless. The ability to strike unpredictably in any form is terrifying. Then, Yan uses her phobia treatment on him, causing herself to tremble. Sunu accepts it, knowing this is how things must be. The spiritual world's influence makes him more sensitive, but he brushes it off, lost in memories. Yan apologizes and offers to pause, but he refuses. She's following his instructions perfectly, never hesitating when something feels off. They step into the second chamber, and what Sunu sees inside catches him off guard. He quickly reminds Yan to stick to the instructions he gave about two-headed creatures. He engages in combat, but is hopelessly outmatched, tossed around like a ragdoll. Yan stands frozen. She isn't allowed to heal him, use Mary's touch, or interfere in any way. All she can do is follow his final order. If a beast comes, for her, run and don't look back. She flees, heart pounding, hoping Sunu is still alive. Her endurance is pathetic. Her body screams in protest, but she still can't use Mary's touch. What does she need to do to survive? Then, the system announces that she has fulfilled the diary quest. she must make a decision, aligning with the first and runner-up players. As a monstrous creature lunges at her from behind, she smiles. Sunu wins. Sunu had just taken down the monstrous two-headed hound, proving his strength and skill. But the battle wasn't over. A relentless swarm of vicious beasts still surrounded him. That's when the system announced that he had met the conditions for the one-on-one combat quest. It also confirmed the rankings for first and second place, determined by mutual agreement. A grin crossed Sunu's face. She was still alive. But with only 10 seconds left, he activated Man of Adversity and tore through the remaining hounds. Like a storm of destruction, when he finally woke up, his mind drifted to the first evil. That person must have endured the same chaos. His former self had once admired the man's unshakable will, but he had never imagined the sheer depth of agony involved. Yanhee approached him, exhausted. She admitted that she had used every skill she had, but nothing had worked. Sunu acknowledged. Her resilience impressed that she had survived despite being in such bad shape. At first, she assumed it was thanks to the traps she had set earlier, but she quickly realized otherwise. When a hound lunged at her, she reacted instantly, dodging and landing a perfect crossbow shot right into its eye. The beast went into a frenzy, but she had already positioned herself for a follow-up attack. Sunu had once considered her dead weight, but he had been completely wrong. A novice healer, who hadn't even received her official class, had managed to endure situations even experienced fighters would struggle with. Over the past week, they had scoured the dungeon, looting every treasure chest they could find. Final Quest's objective was simple: eliminate every creature in the dungeon. Once all the bosses were defeated, the entire dungeon would collapse. Sunu had ensured they were ready. He had collected all the available loot, strengthening his skills in preparation for the final battle. But the process hadn't been easy. Some chests had contained curses instead of rewards, malicious afflictions that even he couldn't handle alone. That was why Yanhee was invaluable. Every time she lifted a curse, however, Sunu couldn't help but think about them. The two figures he considered truly evil. Curses didn't simply vanish, they had to be transferred. The idea that something could invade one's mind at will was deeply unsettling. At last, they reached the dungeon's final chamber. The boss awaited inside. Sunu recalled that it had taken at least 5 E-class hunters to clear this dungeon before, and even then, barely. Yet here they were, an F-rank fighter, and someone who wasn't even classified. If their plan worked, this wouldn't take long. They had made it this far, so dying here was not an option. Yanhee gave a determined nod, signaling that she was ready. They both dropped their bags and stepped forward. The massive door creaked open, revealing a towering albino hound, seated on a throne, surrounded by countless lesser beasts. Sunu immediately noticed something. There were no two-headed hounds among them. When he first arrived, some had mocked the presence of those creatures in this very room, but they had failed to understand the truth. As the number of hounds they had slain grew, the Anubis had absorbed their strength. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. The creature had transformed into a war-driven demon. Sunu wasted no time. Activating every skill in his arsenal, he enhanced his speed and armor before launching himself forward. "Move," he commanded, his voice like a thunderclap. With a single leap, he closed in on the Anubis. The beast remained still, its piercing gaze locked onto him, waiting. Sunu goes all in, aiming to take down Anubis in a single strike, but instead lands nearby, greeted by the deity's mocking laughter. A hound lunges at him with bared fangs, but he raises his iron gauntlet just in time to block the attack, countering with a powerful punch that sends the creature flying. However, the impact leaves his gauntlet battered. It may be made of iron, but it's still just an F-rank item. With no other options, he keeps throwing punches, breaking through the waves of hounds. Meanwhile, Yan activates her healing ability while staying hidden using a special item. Though it's only F-rank, it's enough to mask her presence from these bloodthirsty creatures. She watches in horror as the pack swarms Sunu, who fights relentlessly, knowing that Man of Adversity doesn't last long and they only have one seal of escape. Suddenly, a hound smashes him over the head. The pain surges through him, but thanks to Man of Adversity, all his stats skyrocket, but only for 5 minutes. Now, it's just a race against time. With his enhanced strength, the endless horde of hounds no longer poses a threat. Seconds tick away, and as the ability nears its end, Sunu finally reaches Anubis. The deity retaliates with a powerful energy blast, but Sunu evades it, hurling his dagger straight into Anubis's chest. Without hesitation, he leaps onto his enemy, slamming down with full force. However, the attack takes a severe toll. He's gravely injured. Yon, seeing his dire state, is forced to activate Mary's hands, a skill that transfers all his pain to her. The moment she does, her concealment deactivates, and the hounds immediately sense her presence. Before they can strike, Kim rushes in, finding her in an alarming condition. He lifts her up, desperately trying to wake her. The system suddenly activates, announcing that a requirement has been met. It prompts her to assign first and second priorities. Barely conscious, she struggles to speak, but Sunu firmly declares himself as her first priority. He notices her heavy bleeding. Anubis's attack must have nicked an artery. She's losing a dangerous amount of blood, but he refuses to give up. He swears he'll get her out of this nightmare. Somehow, he manages to escape the dungeon, though he can't recall exactly how. He only remembers that he barely made it out alive. Yon miraculously survives, thanks to an ability she received as a second priority reward, Resurrection, a skill that preserves a faint life force even after sustaining a fatal wound. As for Sunu, his first priority reward is D's sword, an ability once wielded by the first virtue of this generation. But it's not just a single skill. Its power was so feared that even the worst of the worst dreaded it. The realization that he now possesses both the attribute and skill of the first virtue leaves him awestruck. Meanwhile, their financial empire is thriving. A major announcement from Moscow surfaces regarding a moratorium declaration in New York. Across the world, people celebrate Brian's achievements, chanting his name. Over in the British Isles, Gillian receives the same recognition. Reports indicate that accounts with a staggering 40% loss rate have skyrocketed into profitability, creating what seems like an impossible turnaround. Jonathan contacts Sunu, delivering shocking news. Their profits have surged by 450%, totaling a mind-blowing $990 billion. Brian actually pulled it off. The office erupts in celebration, with chaos and excitement filling the air. Sunu acknowledges their success, but remains grounded. While they've gained, they also lost control over the Isle of Man. Still, one part of the business alone saw an astounding 615% profit. Sunu decides to give Yoni the full shares of the new medical corporation when she wakes up. He also mentions that the dungeon inside the facility has been completely destroyed, making space for a fully operational hospital. Along with the shares, he hands her the promised rewards, and the total amount comes to an astonishing $2 billion. Yani is shocked by the sum, and Sunu recognizes that it must have been tough for her, especially since she had been involved in sponsorship activities with very little income. However, with the new medical facility now in place, they'll be able to help many more people. He then asks if she has reconsidered her stance on going into dungeons. Yani, glancing at the papers, admits that she will need a significant amount of money, so she will rely on him as a leader in the future. Meanwhile, a few men are stealing glances at Jessica as she meets Sunu. It's been quite some time since they last spoke, and she gives him a new investment proposal from the director, who previously wrote the Russian investment plan. Jessica mentions that her boss, Gillian, holds her in high regard and is eager for Sunu's opinion on this proposal. Sunu acknowledges that there's no rush, but suggests they try his approach of selling the major IT stocks in the Nasdaq market in New York. Jessica is understandably concerned, but ultimately agrees, noting that the investment worth $30 billion is a big, unconventional deal that doesn't come with the usual risks and responsibilities. Sunu, however, has been keeping a close eye on Gillian's performance and senses that something significant is brewing. Meanwhile, Jonathan, who has been observing Li Cheng's performance as well, is carrying on his own business. He engages in a conversation with a man who presents a new search technology. Jonathan, having already heard about it, remarks that it's $1 million idea. The man is surprised that Jonathan would suggest selling the technology for such a low price, as it's worth much more. Though there have been no buyers yet, the creators have managed the company efficiently, and now is the best time to secure shares before the IPO. However, if the technology is sold now, the creators would have to return to their PhD programs. Jonathan initially offers $1 million for the technology, but after giving it more thought, he hands the man a $10 million check, making him reconsider his plans. The man mentions that he has a partner and wants to discuss the deal with them before making a final decision. Jonathan checks the time and tells him that he has 10 minutes before he needs to leave for Washington. A few short minutes later, the man returns, thanking Jonathan for his consideration, but still intent on refusing the offer. Jonathan, however, insists, handing over another $10 million. He tells the man that if someone like Jonathan, who is known as the god of investment, is this interested in their technology, they're surely on the verge of something big. The man, impressed by Jonathan's reputation, asks how Jonathan created his fortune. Jonathan responds that it wasn't luck, but rather by seizing the right opportunities at the right time. He explains that he has bet his entire fortune twice in the past, and each time, his calculations were correct. Today, he sees another major opportunity. Jonathan then reveals that they currently have over $500 billion in liquid assets ready for investment in the US, Canada, and Japan. However, he adds that when someone is desperate for something, they often don't reveal their true intentions. The man, curious, asks what Jonathan means. Jonathan explains that when they first met, the man was focused on selling, but now, after meeting him, something has changed. He questions if the man truly believes that he can create more value than initially proposed. If the man is confident in his abilities, Jonathan won't stop him, even if he decides to walk away from the deal right now. Jonathan then picks up his phone and cancels his upcoming meeting in Washington, indicating that something much more urgent has come up. The man realizes the seriousness of the situation and acknowledges Jonathan's determination. Jonathan assures him that the $10 million check isn't the final offer, but the beginning of a much larger deal. The man, feeling nervous and unsure, picks up the checks, gripping them tightly, and states that he will treat the situation with the utmost seriousness. However, he demands 50% of the shares and insists that the management rights for those 50% be guaranteed. Jonathan pauses, looks at him, and then smiles. He apologizes for any misunderstandings or perceived threats from earlier, and the two shake hands. Jonathan says that fate will follow his name and expresses hope that their new search engine, Google, will live up to its name. The man eagerly mentions that he's excited to share the deal with his partner, and as he prepares to leave, Jonathan offers a polite farewell. However, once the man walks away, Jonathan's mood shifts dramatically. Sunu steps out from a nearby room, congratulating Jonathan on his successful negotiation. Jonathan, visibly frustrated, can't believe the man nearly passed up a whopping $20 million. Sunu, sensing Jonathan's irritation, explains that while the amount may seem excessive for a fledgling company, the shares are actually underpriced. The company, he assures Jonathan, will experience massive growth in the coming years. At that moment, Jonathan receives a call. It's from John Clark, a former mercenary turned private investigator, now working the streets of Wall Street. John had grown tired of risking his life in the field and switched careers for the more lucrative but less dangerous world of corporate investigation. He finds his new line of work somewhat dull, though, until recently, when they received a case that couldn't be solved by conventional methods. John had proposed a solution that pushed legal boundaries, and to his surprise, his client had smiled approvingly, granting him access to connections with influential figures. While in a van, John and his team prepare for the operation. Sunu is lost in thought, considering the target they're about to confront. The individual had been arrested once before, suspected of first-degree murder, but was released due to insufficient evidence. Sunu suspects it's him and tells his team to remain on alert around the building. If the target attempts to flee, they are to shoot on sight. As they move into position, Sunu reflects on how insane it is for a 13-year-old to be involved in something as serious as this, indicating that the child was likely a dangerous sociopath long before now. Sunu, Jonathan, and their new recruit, T-Boy, decide to confront the target as a team of 3. Sunu warns them not to underestimate the boy's abilities due to his age, emphasizing that doing so would likely lead to disaster. The payout for the job is a staggering $1 billion, so the reasons behind the hunt are irrelevant. However, they still find the situation unsettling. The operation begins, and the team takes their positions. As they approach the door, Sunu hears running water from the bathroom, signaling the target hasn't noticed them yet. But just as the door opens, the boy springs into action, knocking out both T-Boy and Jonathan with impressive skill. Sunu seizes the opportunity and opens fire, but the boy deftly dodges every bullet. Sunu urges the others to regain their senses, commanding them to keep shooting. The boy, however, seems to have a magical barrier protecting him, blocking all the attacks. Sunu recognizes the barrier as a damage-absorbing seal, suggesting the boy is at least SE grade by now. The others continue their barrage, but the bullets remain ineffective. Sunu decides to take matters into his own hands. He charges forward with D's sword, his strike landing cleanly and sending the boy crashing into the wall. Undeterred, Sunu rushes in again, unleashing Odin's fury and attempting to bind the boy with a shackle metal. But the boy counters, blocking the attack and leaving Sunu open to a retaliatory strike. Sunu dodges just in time, landing a brutal punch that knocks the boy to the ground. As Sunu continues to pummel the boy, he realizes that his punches are landing with full force. He relentlessly keeps attacking while Jonathan and T-Boy observe from the sidelines, both stunned by the intensity of the fight. Just then, Bobby grabs Sunu's arm, holding him back. With the Man of Adversity trait activated, Bobby headbutts Sunu, and as others try to fire at him, Bobby vanishes in an instant, using teleportation. Sunu yells that Bobby's range is about 24 meters, so he's still close. He quickly issues orders to send one person to the roof and another to the basement while he checks the streets. As they spread out, Sunu realizes there's a knife embedded in him. In that moment, the Man of Adversity kicks in, and Sunu screams in frustration, realizing they've been outmaneuvered. Despite their heightened senses, they couldn't locate Bobby. As the effects of the trait fade and Sunu's consciousness slips away, he succumbs to exhaustion. The next day, Sunu walks through a tense atmosphere, noting that even the most battle-hardened soldiers are rattled. What they witnessed the previous day was a whole new level of violence. He enters a room where a dead man is laid out on boxes, with T-Boy and John standing by. Sunu examines the body and identifies the cause of death as poison, likely a skill that causes internal damage. He learns the man's name was Brown and mentions that after all of this is resolved, he'll establish an insurance fund for the employees. However, right now, their priority is capturing Bobby. John wonders how they'll catch someone like Bobby, but Sunu warns that if they don't act quickly, Bobby will only grow stronger. If they let this moment slip, even a large military force wouldn't be able to stop him in the future. John agrees, realizing this is no longer just a routine job. Later, John submits a report detailing Bobby's actions. His latest victim was a 28-year-old man he met through an online messaging board. However, with no murder weapon found and the evidence too sparse, Bobby is released. Even the letter Bobby sent to plead his innocence was cleverly submitted to the prosecutor in charge of his case. Sunu, reviewing the information, concludes that Bobby is targeting potential awakeners. He calls Jonathan to ask about their shares in Gold Online, which runs the message board. As a major shareholder, they gain access to the server logs. Sunu discovers that Bobby used multiple aliases to lure and eliminate potential awakeners. He gives John files on some of Bobby's recent contacts and orders him to surveil them. Sunu instructs John to keep their distance, as Bobby might try to make contact. He also suggests John take charge of one of the squads, as they need better organization to catch Bobby. Sunu assures John that the cost won't be an issue, opening a container full of cash that he had already arranged with a trust company. With that, his business in America is concluded. On the flight back, Sunu reads about the latest earnings rankings, with Jonathan at the top and Jillian in 7th. Sunu muses that being in first place isn't so bad, considering the influence a pension fund has on American politics. Such power, controlled by the shadow banks, shapes the world economy behind the scenes. Suddenly, his thoughts are interrupted by a drunk man demanding more alcohol from a waitress. The man, noticing Sunu, mocks him, claiming they may both be in first class, but they're on different levels. He grabs Sunu's shirt, but before he can say more, Sunu uses Odin's Rage, a technique he had learned to control when he saved Jan from a dungeon. It was originally meant as a defibrillator, but it seems to have other uses. At the airport, Yono waits for Sunu. She had decided to trade the 11 points she gained from the dungeon for 11 bronze boxes and had been waiting to open them with him to avoid any misunderstandings, as she was contractually obligated to hand over any items she obtained. Inside the car, she wonders what items she'll get, while Sunu smirks a little. In his office, Yono opens the first box and receives a basic health boost, which makes her happy. But when she opens another box, she's shocked to find the dagger of the clown. She asks if it's any good, and Sunu stares in disbelief, recognizing the item. He knows its dangerous ability to inflict random negative effects on whoever it strikes. Sunu reflects on the fact that the item is similar to the 3 unique weapons, but wonders if it might have been enhanced. Was this really a bronze box item? He recalls the secret curse he applied in the spirit world, random negative effects. But if the strengthening process failed, the item would be destroyed. The 3 one-of-a-kind weapons were the only ones that managed to achieve S-tier through strengthening. The original owner was someone who never stopped digging when passionate about something, although he never imagined it would go this far. Elsewhere, Director Park meets with the chairman, who now addresses him as president due to his newfound influence. Park's demeanor shifts, and the chairman notices, suggesting they have a drink as a form of punishment. Park admits to being the CEO, though it doesn't feel quite right to him. Still, all his assets are within his control. The chairman smirks, observing that Park's eyes can't lie, as at today's meeting nobody could stand up to him. Everyone was like frightened children. The chairman then asks Park to release the shares to the Junil Group, offering a substantial reward, 100 billion or even 1,000 billion for Park's cooperation. This involves equity in the H-Show Group, which controls shares in the Han Shield Group. The Daeun Group had recently proposed a deal worth 200 billion. Park drinks his beverage, noting that with his assets he could make that happen as well. As he prepares to leave, the chairman urges him to reconsider and accept the offer, believing that Park needs money to feel fulfilled. Park, however, feels he has heard enough and suggests the chairman rethink the proposal. As Park walks away and gets into his car, he wonders why he just turned down the chance to pocket 100 or even 200 billion, but admits that it feels good. He's satisfied being a part of Janelle. Then Park gets a call, informing him that a meeting has been postponed until the next day. He expresses surprise about the cancellation and wonders what happened with the woman who turned down the Blue House invitation. Meanwhile, in Sunu's office, Hime looks at the large collection of battle equipment and wonders if they're preparing for war. Sunu reassures her that it's just a collection, so there's no need to worry. He mentions that the media in the country heavily censors news related to Janelle, which is why he called her here to discuss the group's investments. Hime shares some positive news, revealing that they have secured shares in the top 10 business groups amidst the national turmoil. Conglomerates have reorganized their governance structures and created slush funds. She provides an example of how the equity structure shifts between different groups, like UNG, Dreamland, Life, and others, ultimately controlling all shares. This allows for greater control over management succession, earning these shares the title of leashing shares. Hime adds that investors will see this country as a true Gunil republic, both in name and in practice. As summer begins, history has shifted, though natural disasters continue to strike on the same dates as before. When the Olga typhoon hits the Korean peninsula, the stock market remains unaffected, and the global boom seems to follow New York's trends. The current financial upswing started when Russia invested $10 billion in Janelle, and after the financial war, Daeun Security released new Korean fund products. This was followed by the implementation of the Cyber Korea 21 policy. Sunu reflects on the day Korea repaid its last debt to the IMF, knowing that it's time to have a conversation with his parents. He had hoped to show them that he had finished school normally, but now the moment had arrived. Sunu prepares to explain to his father the companies he's been watching and how he plans to enter the market. He also reveals that he's been accepted as an analyst for Jonathan Investment, which takes his father by surprise. Sunu's father is impressed and praises him, considering this achievement to be nothing short of genius. Sunu feels that this declaration should be enough to ease his parents' worries, but he can't help but wonder what his father is thinking. His father notices Sunu's grim expression and asks about it. Sunu apologizes, but his father reassures him, saying there's no need to apologize. He's proud of Sunu's accomplishments, but is saddened that he won't be able to be there during such a crucial time. He wishes he could check in on him and see how things are going. As his father embraces him tightly, he tells Sunu that he's all grown up now and should stop looking around for reassurance. He should go out into the world, enter the big leagues, and do whatever he desires. The father apologizes for not being able to offer more support, but Sunu is deeply moved and tears up, feeling incredibly grateful for the love and support he's received.